The morning light is pale grey, barely seeping through the low cloud that hangs over London, and you walk along a narrow street that leads toward the brewery. Your footsteps, the only sound besides the distant trundle of a cart somewhere far behind you. The cobbles underfoot are slick from the night's drizzle, dark and glistening, reflecting the weak sky and small broken patches that shift as you pass. You carry a canvas bag, its strap worn soft and brown, and inside are a few simple tools: a wooden driver, a light hammer, a length of string, a small rule. The bag sways gently with your stride, a faint tap of the driver against the rule sounding now and then, muffled by the canvas, and you feel its familiar weight resting against your hip. Ahead, the high brick wall of the brewery comes into view, its bricks the color of dried blood, stained in places with the seep of old moisture that has left trails of darker red and grey. The heavy wooden gates are already open, just wide enough for a single person to enter, and you slip through the gap, turning your shoulders slightly to pass without brushing the wet iron hinges. As soon as you step inside, the sounds of the street fall away, replaced by a deeper quiet that seems to press against your ears, a quiet so complete that you can hear your own coat rustle with each breath. The brewery yard stretches before you, a wide rectangle of cobblestones and flagstones, bordered by the brewery buildings and by a long, open-sided shelter where barrels are made. The air here is different from the street. It holds the warm, sweet scent of malt and yeast, a smell that rises from the very ground where spent grains have soaked into the cracks between the stones, mixing with the clean, sharp odor of wet stone and the faint, earthy perfume of oak that drifts from the shelter. You pause just inside the gate, your boots still on the threshold, and you let your gaze travel slowly around the yard, taking in each detail with the patience of someone who has arrived before the day's demands. The cobblestones are uneven, worn smooth in the middle by years of cartwheels and booted feet, and here and there small puddles have collected in the depressions, their surfaces still as glass, holding a perfect inverted image of the grey sky. A single pigeon flutters down onto the ridge of the shelter's roof, and then settles, tucking its head into the soft feathers of its breast, undisturbed by your presence. The only movement beyond the bird is the slow drift of mist from the steam vent of the boiler house, a thin white column that rises, wavers, and disappears into the grey air with a silence that makes it seem like a ghost of itself. You step fully into the yard, and the sound of your boots changes from the dull, rumbling thud of the pavement outside to a sharper, crisper report on the cobbles, each step a single note that fades before the next begins. You stop again, as if waiting for something, but nothing calls you forward. The day has not yet begun in earnest, and the yard remains suspended in that quiet interval between night and labour. Your eyes find the shelter where the oak staves are kept running the length of the yard wall, a simple roof of slate supported by thick wooden posts open on three sides to the air. Under it, arranged with the care of a habit formed over many years, are the staves. They are stacked in neat rows, their ends forming a smooth, almost polished wall of wood grain that ranges in colour from pale honey to deep, muted brown, each stave holding the memory of the tree it came from. You walk toward them, your pace unhurried, and as you draw closer, the smell of oak becomes more distinct, a dry, tannin-rich fragrance that mingles with the damp air and seems to cling to the back of your throat. You set your bag down on a low stone ledge near the shelter, the canvas collapsing softly, and you stand for a moment simply looking at the staves. Some have already been shaped by the cooper, their edges beveled to a gentle angle, their surfaces planed smooth so that they will fit snugly together when the barrel is assembled and the hoops driven home. You step closer to the stack, and you reach out, not in a rush, but with the slow deliberation of someone who has all the time in the world. Your fingers brush the face of a single stave. The wood is cool and faintly rough where the grain raises in tiny ridges that run from end to end like the lines on a weathered map, and you trace one of those ridges all the way from the wide middle to the narrower end, feeling the subtle curve that will give the barrel its belly. The scent of oak rises from the contact, fresh and clean, bringing with it a faint hint of the forest floor and old leaves. You withdraw your hand and you look back across the yard at the brewery buildings. Their windows are dark, the glass reflecting nothing but the pale sky, and the tall chimney with the name of the brewery in faded white letters is silent. No smoke rising from its cap. From somewhere deep inside the building, You hear a muffled clink, a single note that might be a dray horse stirring in its stall or a boiler ticking as it cools, but it is so faint and so brief that it could be part of the quiet itself, a sound the quiet chose to make. The morning light has not brightened. It remains that soft, pearl-grey diffusion that makes every colour seem muted and gentle, as if the whole yard has been painted with watered-down ink. The reds of the bricks are softened to a dusty rose, the greens of the moss between the cobbles are grey-green like old velvet, and the oak staves under the shelter seem almost golden by comparison, catching the meagre light as if they held it within their fibres. You move a little farther into the shelter, stepping onto the dry ground beneath the slate roof, where wood shavings and sawdust have packed into a soft, springy floor that muffles your steps and sends up a small puff of dust with each footfall. The air here is stiller than the yard outside, protected from the slight breeze that occasionally stirs the mist and makes the puddles shiver. You can smell the sawdust now, a dry, almost sweet scent that overlays the oak and the distant malt, and under your boots you feel the slight give of the packed shavings, a cushion that remembers the weight of many boots. In one corner of the shelter, the cooper's tools are laid out on a heavy wooden bench. More drivers of different sizes, a crows with a toothed blade, several hammers, a draw knife, and a set of iron hoops, some rust-darkened, others newer with a dull silver sheen. You do not touch them. You simply look, taking in the order of the workspace, the way each tool has its place, the way the bench shows the marks of long-used small indentations where a hammer has been set down thousands of times, a polished patch where the cooper's palm has leaned year after year, smoothing the wood to a shine. You turn and you lean your shoulders against one of the shelter's posts, facing the yard. The coolness of the wood seeps through the fabric of your coat, a pleasant cold that anchors you to the moment and seems to slow your breathing further. You close your eyes for a long, slow breath and you listen. The silence is not absolute. It is layered and full of tiny textures. Behind the foreground quiet, there is a low, constant hum that might be the city itself breathing, a distant murmur so deep it feels like a vibration in the stones beneath your feet. Closer, you can hear the occasional drip of water from the slate roof of the shelter, a soft pat onto a patch of green moss that grows where the drip lands, each drop a small percussion that marks the passing seconds without hurry. The pigeon on the roof resettles its feathers with a faint scratch, the sound of quills sliding against one another. Somewhere, far off, a dog barks twice and then falls silent, and the silence that follows is deeper than before. And underneath it all, like a metronome set to the slowest tempo, the steady, even thump of your own heart keeps time. You open your eyes again and let them rest on a puddle a few feet away, where the reflection of the shelter's post shimmers and then stills, a dark double of the wood that quivers only when a breath of wind touches the surface. The day feels suspended, caught between the last of the night and the arrival of the working hours. You know that soon the cooper will come, and the other apprentices, and the yard will fill with the sounds of hammering and winding and the hiss of steam. But right now, in this interlude, there is only the gradual lightening of the sky, now taking on the faintest tinge of yellow at the horizon beyond the brewery wall. You push yourself away from the post and walk back to the stack of staves. This time, you select one and you lift it from the pile, feeling its weight, its balance shifting in your hands. You hold it in both hands, turning it over slowly, examining the grain that runs in fine parallel lines like a map of quiet rivers, each line a year of growth recorded in the wood. There is a small knot in the grain near one edge, a dark eye that the cooper's plane has rendered smooth and flat, and you run your thumb over it, feeling the hard swirling ring that holds a different density from the straight grain around it. The stave is slightly tacky from the humidity, but not damp, and it smells of the forest where the oak once stood, a memory of leaves and soil that somehow survives the sawmill and the shaping tools. You place it back exactly where it was, aligning it carefully with its neighbours so that the rail remains unbroken, and you brush the sawdust from your hands with a slow, absent motion. At the far end of the shelter, a row of finished barrels stands, their iron hoops tight and dark, their wood a rich, warm brown that has deepened with age and exposure. You walk over to them, your step slow and even, measuring the distance with a patience that feels like a meditation, and you stop before the nearest one. You do not have to touch it to know the texture. You have learned it by heart through many hours of looking and feeling. The hoop nearest you is the top chime hoop, driven down until it bites into the oak, holding the staves together with a pressure that is uniform around the circle, a perfect ring of tension. You can see where the driver's taps have left tiny, shiny spots on the iron surface, each one a record of the cooper's careful, patient work, a constellation of bright marks against the dark metal. The barrel is silent, holding nothing but air, yet it seems to possess a completeness, a quiet purpose that radiates from its swelling sides and firm ends. You stand there for a long moment, letting the image of the barrel settle into your mind, the way its curve swells outward and then tucks back in with mathematical grace, the proportion of the bilge to the chime, the way the light gleams on the hoops and leaves the wood in soft shadow. Then you turn back toward the gate. You do not leave. You simply walk to the middle of the yard, where the cobblestones are the widest and the sky is open above you, a vast, pale dome. The mist from the boiler house has thickened slightly, curling around your ankles in slow, ghostly eddies before dissipating into the damp air. You look up at the sky, a pale canvas of cloud that seems to lower gently, and you feel the cool air on your cheeks, your forehead, the backs of your hands. The temperature is just above chill, comfortable enough to stand without shivering, cool enough to keep you awake and aware of every small sensation. The brush of the breeze on your neck, the slight stiffness in your fingers from the morning damp. You lower your gaze and you notice for the first time the small details that had escaped your earlier sweeping look. A coil of rope left beside the windlass, its fibers stiff with old moisture and beginning to fray at the ends. A wooden bucket half filled with water, its surface coated with a thin film of sawdust that has settled into a soft brown skin. A single oak leaf, blown in from somewhere beyond the walls, lying brown and curled against the base of the water pump, its edges crisp and its veins standing out fine script. You walk to the pump, an old iron affair with a long handle and a spout that drips rhythmically into a stone trough, each drop catching the light for an instant. You work the handle once, twice, and a stream of clear water gushes out, splashing into the trough and sending ripples racing across the surface, their circles expanding and overlapping before disappearing. The sound is loud in the quiet, a brief cascade of notes that fades quickly into the background hum. You cup your hand and you let the water run over your fingers, cold and fresh, and you take a sip, tasting the slight mineral tang that speaks of deep wells and underground streams running through the London clay. Then you stop the flow and you dry your hand on the rough fabric of your trousers, and you return to the shelter. The canvas bag sits where you left it, patient and still, a small familiar shape against the grey stone ledge. You crouch beside it, and you unfasten the buckle, lifting the flap and checking the tools inside, though you know they are exactly as you packed them, the same as every morning. The wooden driver, a length of beech rounded at one end, fits your hand perfectly when you lift it, the wood warm from being near your body. The hammer, its head darkened with age and polished by grip, balances with a familiar heft that feels like an extension of your arm. The string is coiled neatly in a figure eight, and the rule is folded shut, its brass hinge catching a tiny gleam of light. These simple objects are your companions in the slow work ahead, and you close the bag with a soft press of the buckle, leaving everything ready. You straighten up, feeling the first subtle shift in the day's rhythm as the light grows a shade brighter, the clouds thinning just enough to reveal a disk of sun so pale it is almost indistinguishable from the grey around it, a patient, milky presence. You can hear, far off, the voice of a carter calling to his horse, the sound carrying strangely through the narrow streets, stretched and softened by distance until it becomes just another thread in the quiet tapestry. It is a signal, though not yet an urgent one, that the world outside the brewery yard is stirring, that the city is waking. Inside the yard, you are still alone. You settle yourself on the low stone ledge where you left your bag, your back against the rough brick that holds a memory of the night's cold, and you let your hands rest loosely in your lap, one palm over the other. The minutes stretch out, long and empty, without demand or measure. You do not count them, you simply sit, watching the mist thin and drift. The staves stand in their rows, the puddles hold their stillness, the pigeon remain a small hunched statue on the roof. The quiet is not emptiness, it is a presence, a soft blanket that wraps around the yard and holds everything in a state of suspension, a pause that seems to have no beginning and no end. You can feel the tension of the coming day somewhere at the edge of your awareness, like a tide that is still far out, only a distant murmur on the horizon, not yet calling for your attention. For now, there is only this: the cool air, the damp stone, the smell of oak and molten sawdust, the steady rhythm of your breathing that rises and falls without effort. Time moves slowly in the brewery yard, and you move with it, unhurried, waiting for nothing in particular, content to be exactly where you are. You glance one more time at the oak staves standing in their neat rows, and you think about the iron hoops that will soon encircle them, the taps that will drive them down with a patient ringing cadence, the long process that turns separate pieces into a whole barrel. But that is for later. For now, there is only the wait, the peace, and the quiet light of an early Victorian morning settling over the brewery yard like a gentle hand. You leave the low stone ledge and the quiet of your resting spot, crossing the short distance to the stack of staves that waits under the open shelter, your footsteps soft on the packed sawdust that covers the ground. The morning light has shifted only a little, the pale disk of the sun still veiled behind a thin wash of cloud, so the yard remains wrapped in that gentle grey-yellow luminescence that makes everything appear softer, as if all sharp edges have been rubbed away by the damp air. The staves are exactly as you left them, standing in their neat rows, their shaped edges aligned, the exposed end grain showing a pattern of rings that you can trace with your eyes, each one a slow year of growth recorded in the pale oak. You stop in front of the stack and you do not rush to begin. Instead, you stand still for a moment, letting your gaze rest on the individual pieces, choosing where to start without any conscious hurry, the way a person might choose a single book from a shelf of many, guided by nothing more than an inner sense of rightness. The oak is a pale, warm brown, like weak tea with a drop of milk, and the surfaces that have been planed by the cooper's hand are smooth to the point of silkiness, catching the muted light with a faint, low sheen. You reach out and you lift the first stave from the pile, using both hands, one near the middle and one near the top, and you feel its weight settle into your palms with a pleasant solidity. The wood is cool, but not unpleasantly so, and as you hold it, you become aware of the faint smell of tannin that rises from its surface, a dry, slightly astringent scent that reminds you of strong tea leaves or the inside of an old wooden chest. You turn the stave over slowly, inspecting it from one end to the other, your eyes following the grain that runs in straight, close lines from the wide center to the narrower, tapered ends. There is a small, dark fleck of medullary ray that cuts across the grain near the top, a natural marking that the cooper has left untouched, knowing it will not weaken the wood, and you rub your thumb over it, feeling how the texture changes from smooth to faintly ridged and back again within the space of a finger's width. The curve of the stave is subtle, a gentle bow that will become part of the barrel's swelling bilge, and you sight along its length, closing one eye and holding it up against the pale sky, checking for any twist or warp that might make it difficult to fit. It is straight and true, the cooper's initial shaping having done its work with the care of a practiced hand. You set this first stave aside, leaning it carefully against a post of the shelter where it will not fall or get underfoot, and you turn back to the stack for another. One by one you select the staves you will need, going through the pile with the same slow, methodical attention, never rushing, never skipping a step. Each stave is lifted, turned, inspected, and then placed with the growing group, each one leaning at a slight angle against the dark wooden post. The pile of chosen staves grows by inches, and the pile of unselected ones shrinks, the hollow in the stack becoming deeper as you go. You feel the weight of each piece varying only slightly. Most are within a few ounces of one another, the cooper having hewn them from the same oak log, but some carry a touch more moisture deep in their fibers, and these feel a fraction heavier in your hands, their ends a shade darker where the sap once flowed. You raise such a stave to your nose and inhale, smelling the dampness that lingers deep within, a richer, earthier note beneath the dominant tannin, like the floor of a forest after rain. It is not a defect, only a variation, and you set this piece with the others, accepting its small difference as part of the nature of wood. The process repeats with a quiet, unhurried cadence. You lift a stave, you turn it, you look at its edges where the cooper's plane has cut a precise bevel, You check the bevel with the pad of your thumb, feeling the angle, and then you either keep it or, rarely, return it to the stack if some hidden flaw catches your eye. The sounds are minimal, the soft scrape of wood against wood as you slide a stave free, the faint thump of your palm against the flat face to knock away a clinging shaving, the quiet click of two staves touching when you lean them together. Outside the shelter, a slight breeze stirs the mist that still lingers near the ground, and you hear the rustle of a few dead leaves that have gathered in the corner of the yard, a dry, papery sound that comes and goes like a whisper. Otherwise, the brewery yard remains hushed, the pigeons still dozing on the roof, the windows still dark. After a time, you have gathered enough staves for the barrel you will raise, and you stand back, counting them without numbers, just letting your eyes confirm that the tally is right. The row of leaning staves making a tidy line against the post, their pale bellies all facing the same way. You leave them there for the moment, and you turn your attention to the ground in the center of the shelter, where the light is best. A patch of beaten earth scattered with clean sawdust that has been swept free of any stones or twigs. You crouch down, feeling the slight pull of the fabric across your knees, and you begin to arrange the staves in a circle on the ground. You take the first stave, and you set it upright, its wide middle resting on the earth, its beveled edges pointing inward toward an invisible center. It stands alone for a moment, precarious, until you steady it with one hand. With the other hand, you reach for the second stave and you bring it alongside the first, fitting the beveled edge of one against the beveled edge of the other, the angles meeting with a soft kiss of wood on wood. You adjust them slightly, wiggling the second stave until the seam between them is as tight as it can be without force, the line of contact a hair's breadth wide, visible only if you look closely. You hold them both with your left hand, cupping their outer curbs, and you add a third stave, then a fourth, each one finding its place in the circle, the assembly beginning to resemble a giant, open-ended flower made of pale oak petals. The staves do not stay in place on their own yet. They need constant support, your hands moving from one to the next, pressing here, nudging there, feeling how the tension changes as the circle grows. When you have set the last stave of the first half circle, the structure tries to spring open, the natural outward inclination of the unbent wood working against the shape you are imposing, and you have to hold it all together, your arms forming a loose embrace around the flared top. The work is slow and patient. You do not fight the wood, but coax it, shifting a stave that sits too proud, pushing another inward until its bevel matches its neighbor, all the while breathing evenly, your body relaxed despite the effort. The smell of the oak intensifies as you handle it, the warmth of your hands releasing the oils trapped in the fibers, and the air in the shelter fills with that dry, sweet-scented perfume that will linger all day. Once the circle is complete, you reach for the temporary truss hoop that hangs from a wooden peg on the shelter post, a thin, flexible band of iron about the thickness of your little finger. It is not rusted like the permanent hoops, but it has a dark patina, a brownish-black coating that comes from years of handling and contact with steamed wood. The iron is pliable. It will bend without breaking, and it holds its shape just enough to do its job of temporarily cinching the top of the stave assembly. You carry the truss hoop back to the circle of staves, and you kneel down, the sawdust pressing into the weave of your trousers, the ground cool beneath you. Opening the hoop slightly by pulling its ends apart with your hands, you feel the metal give with a faint, creaking resistance that transmits a low vibration up through your wrists. You slip the opened hoop over the narrow top of the stave assembly, letting it rest loosely around the upper third of the staves, where the cone is still open and flared. The hoop sits there, a dark ring that rests against the pale wood, its inner surface touching the staves at only a few points, the rest of the circle still too wide to grip. Now comes the patient work of drawing the hoop down and tightening it so that the staves are pulled inward, their bevels seated more firmly, the whole structure transformed from a loose collection of individual pieces into a unified shape that will hold itself together without your hands. You position the hoop so that it sits level, not tilted, and you begin to tap it gently downward with the wooden driver, the same beach tool you had in your bag. You hold the driver against the top edge of the iron ring, and you strike its rounded end with the hammer, but only with the lightest of taps, a series of soft thuds that barely dent the silence, each one causing the hoop to slide a fraction of an inch. You move around the assembly in a slow walk, tapping the hoop on one side, then the opposite side, then the points in between, always checking that the iron remains horizontal. The tap of the driver produces a low, woody note, a sound that seems to be absorbed by the staves, while the occasional clink when the hammer slips and meets iron directly rings out with a sharper, brighter tone before fading into the damp air. The staves respond to the tightening hoop with small, creaking protests, their dry fibers rubbing together as they are forced inward, the cone slowly narrowing. You pause often, stepping back to look at the shape from a distance, your head tilted, your eyes measuring the symmetry of the curve. One stave near the middle seems to be lagging. Its top end has not drawn in as far as its neighbors, leaving a slight gap at the seam. You move to it, and you give it a gentle push with your palm, feeling the resistance, and then you tap the hoop just above it with a little more emphasis. 2 quick taps that send the iron sliding a crucial quarter-inch, and the gap closes, the bevel seating firmly against its partner. You run your finger along the seam, tracing the joint from the hoop down to the flared bottom, and you feel a uniform smoothness, a line so fine it is almost invisible. The truss hoop now sits about a hand's width down from the top of the staves, and the assembly has taken on the rough cone shape you need, narrow at the top, flaring out as it descends, the staves leaning outward at a gentle, even angle. You give the hoop one last series of taps, circling the assembly once more with the driver, making minute adjustments that only your trained eye can perceive, each tap a soft punctuation. The sound of your hammer is unhurried, a slow rhythm that matches your breathing, and between taps the only other sound is the distant, mournful cry of a gull that has strayed inland from the river, its voice carrying across the rooftops as a fading, lonely note. You stop and you lift the driver away, setting it down on the bench, and you step back fully from the stave assembly, standing upright with a slow, deliberate stretch that eases the small stiffness in your lower back from crouching. The truss hoop holds the staves securely. You can see the tension in the iron, a slight flattening of the curve where the metal resists the outward push of the oak. The whole cone stands on its own now, precariously balanced but self-supporting, the wide bottom ends of the staves resting on the earth, their points of contact, uneven on the ground but collectively stable. You walk around it once, slowly, inspecting each stave in turn, noting the variations in grain that run like fine brushstrokes up and down the wood. One stave has a small, knot-shaped hole that catches the light differently, a dark, swirling eye that seems to watch you as you pass, and you pause at it, touching it lightly with your fingertip, feeling the dense, compacted fibers that will hold tight against the pressure of the future hoops. Another stave shows a faint, silvery streak of medullary ray that gleams like a mark left by a trailing finger in wet sand, and you follow its length with your eyes until it disappears under the shadow of the iron ring. All the while, the scent of the oak continues to fill the shelter, mixing now with the cool metallic tang of the iron hoop and the ever-present background of malt from the brewery. The sky outside has brightened another shade. The clouds are thinning slowly, and a wash of weak, buttery light spills over the top of the brewery wall, catching the edge of the slate roof and making the wet patches on the cobblestones shine like polished metal. The mist is almost gone, leaving the air clearer, sharper, and you can now see the individual bricks of the brewery building across the yard, the details of their rough texture and the streaks of black soot that mark the path of old flue gases from the chimney. The yard is still quiet, but the quality of the silence has changed. It is no longer the hush of early dawn, but the expectant stillness just before the working day begins in earnest. A silence that seems to be waiting for the first true sound of labor. You return your attention to the stave assembly, and you check the truss hoop one more time, pressing down on it with both hands to ensure it will not slip, pushing with a firm, even pressure that meets solid resistance. It holds. You nod to yourself, a small inward acknowledgement of the work done so far, and you then turn your gaze to the bottom of the cone where the staves spread wide. The ends of the staves at ground level are not yet shaped to receive the chime. They are rough and square cut, and they form an irregular, jagged circle on the dirt. You fetch a short length of rope from the bench, the same coil you noticed earlier, and you tie it loosely around the flared bottom, not to cinch it tight, but simply to hold the staves from splaying too far, keeping them within a manageable diameter for the next step. The rope is coarse and slightly frayed, and it smells of old hemp and dust. a scent that reminds you of the docks and ships and the long journeys the hemp itself once made. You tie a simple knot, a bowline that will not slip, and you tug it gently, watching the staves shift a hair's breadth inward, their creak almost inaudible. With the top held by the truss hoop and the bottom loosely gathered by the rope, the stave assembly is ready for the steam tent. It resembles a giant, unfinished basket, open at both ends, a structure full of potential, but still far from being a barrel. You stand beside it for a while, your hand resting lightly on one of the staves, and you feel the subtle vibration that seems to live within the wood, a thrum that is not sound, but a sense of stored tension, the oak remembering its former life as a living tree, and slowly accepting its new shape. The temperature in the shelter is still cool, though the morning's damp chill has begun to lift, and you feel the air on your face as a gentle, neutral presence, neither warm nor cold. In the distance you hear the brewery's main gate creak open further, a long, slow groan of hinges that tells you someone else has arrived in the yard, perhaps the cooper himself or another apprentice, but they do not enter the shelter. They go into the main building, their footsteps fading into the brick corridors, leaving you alone once more. You spend a few more unhurried minutes cleaning up the area around the assembly. You pick up the few stray wood shavings that have stuck to your trousers, and you drop them into a small pile near the bench. You hang the truss hoop's spare ring back on its peg. You brush the sawdust from your hands with a few quick flicks. Then you stand still, facing the cone of staves, and you let your mind settle into the quiet rhythm that the work demands. There is no need for thought. The process has become part of your muscle memory, a sequence of small repetitive actions that flow one into the next without conscious direction. You rest in that state for a time, simply being with the wood and the iron and the soft light, and you notice the small, pleasing details that might otherwise go unseen. The way the sawdust on the ground holds the imprint of your boots in overlapping patterns. The way the iron hoop throws a thin, precise shadow onto the oak, like a line drawn with a ruler. The way the dust motes swirl in the single shaft of stronger light that now angles through a gap in the roof and touches the floor just beside the cone. The shaft of light moves imperceptibly with the sun's slow climb, and you watch it creep across the sawdust, a bright, golden finger that illuminates the fine particles suspended in the air and makes them look like tiny floating specks of copper. The effect is mesmerizing, and you allow yourself to be still, a witness to the quiet magic of an ordinary morning. The time passes without measure, and the cone of staves stands patient and ready, its oak pale and clean, its iron ring dark and strong, a beginning that needs only the heat of steam to become something more. You are content to wait for that next step, and so you do. Leaning against the post once again, your arms folded loosely, your gaze soft, your breathing deep and regular, the whole world reduced to the small, calm space of the cooper's shelter and the silent promise of the work to come. The cone of staves stands before you, held together by the truss hoop near its top, the wide ends splayed out on the ground where the rope loops loosely around them, keeping the shape within a manageable circle. The morning light has continued its slow brightening, shifting from pale grey to a soft, buttery yellow that now washes over the shelter roof and spills down the front of the stave assembly, illuminating the grain of the oak with a gentle clarity. You know the next step is to raise the bundle upright so it stands on its wider end, transforming the cone into the rough, flared shape of a barrel to be, and you approach it without hurry, moving your body with the deliberate calm that has marked every action so far. You bend your knees and place both hands on opposite sides of the cone, your fingers spreading over the smooth faces of two staves, feeling the coolness of the wood and the slight vibration of tension that runs through the whole assembly. The cone is heavier than it looks, the weight of the oak staves combining into a solid mass that resists your first gentle lift, so you adjust your grip, moving your hands lower, nearer the wide base, and you rock the bundle toward you, tilting it up onto the edge of its bottom circumference. The staves shift with a soft, woody grumble, their beveled edges rubbing against each other, and the truss hoop pings once, a high, clear note that hangs in the air for a fraction of a second. You pause with the cone tilted, letting the weight settle, and then you rock it back the other way, a gentle seesaw motion that loosens the base's grip on the earth and lets you work your hands underneath the flared rim. With a steady, even pull, you lift the narrow top toward the sky, guiding the whole assembly into a vertical position. The wide bottom now resting fully on the ground, the staves pointing upward like the petals of an inverted flower. The cone sways slightly as it finds its new balance, and you steady it with both hands, waiting for the tiny movements to cease, the oak groaning once, twice, then falling silent. Now the barrel shape stands before you, a tapered wooden tower with its narrow top crowned by the dark iron truss hoop, its wide base settled firmly on the packed sawdust and earth, the rope still draped loosely around the bottom to keep the staves from sprawling. You step back, brushing a few bits of sawdust from your palms, and you look at the upright assembly from a few paces away, checking that it stands straight, not leaning toward the bench or the stack. It is true enough. A slight tilt to the left can be fixed later when the permanent hoops go on, and for now, it simply needs to hold steady while the steam does its work. The yard around you is still quiet, though you can hear the distant, muffled sounds of activity beginning inside the brewery. A door closing, the rumble of a barrel being rolled across a wooden floor, the low voice of someone calling to a drayman. These sounds do not intrude on your concentration. They are part of the background, a soft tapestry of noise that makes the silence in the shelter feel deeper by contrast. You leave the upright stave assembly standing, and you walk to the corner of the shelter where the steam tent is kept, a heavy folded mass of canvas draped over a wooden rack. The tent is beige-colored, stained with years of use, ringed with darker patches where the steam has condensed and left mineral traces, and it smells of damp cloth and old wood, a musty, comforting scent that reminds you of sailcloth and rain. You lift it from the rack, feeling its substantial weight in your arms, the canvas thick and stiff, and you carry it back to the upright staves, the bundle pressing against your chest and stomach, making your footsteps slightly heavier, more deliberate. At the base of the assembly, you set the tent down on the ground and you begin to unfold it, shaking out the folds one by one, the canvas making a soft, flapping sound that echoes briefly off the shelter roof. The tent is shaped like a cone itself, wider at the bottom and tapering to a small opening at the top, designed to fit over the stave assembly like a loose hood. You find the bottom edge and you lift it, walking around the stave bundle with the canvas held high, draping it over the top of the assembly, the fabric catching on the rough edges of the staves before sliding down with a rustle. The tent settles over the staves unevenly at first, one side hanging lower, the other bunched near the truss hoop, and you spend a few quiet minutes adjusting it, tugging the canvas here, smoothing a wrinkled air, walking slowly around the base to ensure an even drape. The heavy cloth muffles the sounds of the yard even further. Under the tent, the staves are hidden, their pale oak replaced by the plain, utilitarian beige of the canvas, and the whole assembly now looks like a shrouded figure standing in the dim corner of the shelter, patient and still. The bottom edges of the tent touch the ground, extending outward in a small pool of excess fabric, and you tuck them gently under the wide rim of staves, using the weight of the wood to hold the canvas in place. The top of the tent remains open, a small, round hole through which you can see a patch of the sky, now a pale, watery blue as the clouds break apart. With the tent in position, you turn your attention to the boiler, a small, squat iron pot that stands in the far corner of the yard, set on a brick plinth with a chimney pipe that vents into the brewery's main flue. The boiler is already lit, its firebox glowing a dull orange through the crack in the iron door, and a thin wisp of smoke rises from the chimney, curling into the air with the slow, languid motion of a drifting feather. A leather hose, dark brown and polished by handling, hangs from a hook on the side of the boiler, its end fitted with a brass nozzle that has been shaped to fit the top opening of the steam tent. You walk over to the boiler, your boots sounding sharper on the cobblestones now, a series of crisp, even clicks that mark your progress, and you lift the hose from its hook, feeling the warmth that has already crept into the leather from the heated metal nearby. The hose is heavier than the canvas tent, its interior lined with a spiral of wire that keeps it from collapsing under the pressure of the steam, and it coils in your hands like a sleepy snake, the brass nozzle dangling at the end and catching the morning light with a dull gleam. You carry the hose back to the tent, paying out the length carefully so it does not kink or snag on the cobblestones, and you position the nozzle directly over the top opening of the tent, aligning it so the steam will flow straight down into the hollow center of the stave assembly. The connection is simple. The brass nozzle is shaped with a slight taper that fits snugly into the hole, and you press it down gently, feeling the canvas give a little, the leather hose now rising upward from the top of the tent like a dark, curved stem. A small wisp of steam leaks from the joint, just a ghost of vapor that vanishes as soon as it appears, and you adjust the angle slightly, pressing the nozzle deeper until the fit is secure and the leak stops. You return to the boiler, your steps unhurried, and you check the water level in the small glass gauge on the side, noting the dark line of water that sits just above the halfway mark. Plenty for a long steaming. The firebox door is warm to the touch, the iron handle slightly greasy from the coal tar that has accumulated over years of use, and you open it a crack, peering in at the embers that glow and pulse with a slow, rhythmic breathing. You add a small scoop of coal from the bucket beside the boiler, the black lumps tumbling into the firebox with a soft clatter, and you close the door, listening to the renewed crackle of the flames as they find the fresh fuel. The boiler begins to mutter to itself, a low, throaty rumble that travels through the brick plinth and into the cobblestones, a vibration you can feel through the soles of your boots, a deep, continuous hum that sits just at the edge of hearing. You then turn the small brass valve on the side of the boiler, the one that controls the flow of steam into the hose, and you open it slowly, a quarter turn at a time, listening for the change in sound that will tell you the steam is moving. At first, there is nothing, only the same low rumble and the distant shouts of the carters on the street beyond the wall, but then you hear a faint hissing from the top of the tent, a thin, high-pitched whisper that grows steadily louder as the steam begins to flow through the hose. You walk back to the tent, standing a few feet away, and you watch as the first visible steam curls from the loose weave of the canvas near the bottom edge, a delicate white plume that rises and twists, disappearing into the cool air of the shelter. The hissing continues, a constant steady sound like a distant waterfall or a kettle, kept at a gentle boil, and it fills the space under the slate roof, washing away the earlier silence and replacing it with a soft, breathy white noise that seems to press against your eardrums with a calming pressure. The steam tent itself begins to change. The canvas darkens in patches as it absorbs the moisture, going from beige to a deep, saturated brown, and the shape of the staves underneath becomes faintly visible, the outline of the cone emerging through the clinging fabric like the ribs of a sleeping animal. You adjust the valve one more time, reducing the flow slightly so the hissing settles into a steady, even sigh rather than a sharp whistle, and you nod to yourself, satisfied with the balance. The steaming process will take some time, and there is nothing to do now but wait. You find a place to stand near the tent, leaning against the same wooden post that has supported you through the morning, and you settle into the patience that this kind of work demands. The steam continues to flow, a constant, invisible river of heat that fills the tent and soaks into the oak staves, raising their temperature degree by degree, softening the lignin that binds the wood fibers together, making the oak pliable and willing to bend. You can smell the change happening. The dry, tannic scent of the oak shifts into something sweeter and richer, like the fragrance of a carpenter's workshop on a hot day, and it mixes with the clean, slightly metallic smell of the steam itself, a scent that reminds you of freshly ironed linen and the cool mist that rises from a river at dawn. The canvas tent adds its own note to the blend, the musty odor of old canvas and the faint tang of minerals left by countless previous steamings, creating a layered perfume that is both comforting and strangely invigorating. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the steam wash over you, a constant, unchanging hiss that has no beginning and no end, a sound that seems to exist outside of time. When you open your eyes, your gaze drifts to the top of the tent, where the brass nozzle is still securely seated, and you watch the small wisps of steam that escape around the joint, curling upward and vanishing into the rafters. The rafters themselves are dark with age, the old oak beams showing deep cracks and checks that have opened over the years, and they're festooned with cobwebs that shimmer with captured moisture, tiny droplets of condensed steam that catch the light and glimmer like 1,000 miniature diamonds. A single drop falls from a rafter and lands on the canvas tent with a soft, muffled pat, spreading into a small dark spot that quickly dries as the heat from within evaporates the moisture. Time stretches out, long and formless, as you stand in the shelter and listen to the steam, The hissing sound ebbs and flows slightly as the pressure in the boiler changes, the firebox crackling in response, and you occasionally stir from your post to walk over to the boiler and check the water level, tossing a small shovelful of coal onto the fire if the rumble grows too soft, ensuring the steam never stops. These small tasks punctuate the quiet waiting with a gentle rhythm, and each round of the yard follows the same pattern. You stir, you walk, you check the gauge, you feed the fire, you walk back, you lean, you listen. The repetition is soothing, a slow, circular dance that requires no thought, only presence. The light in the yard has continued to change. The morning is now well underway, the sun fully risen and visible as a bright, hazy disk behind the thinning clouds, and the shadows cast by the shelter posts have shortened and sharpened, cutting dark angles across the sawdust floor. The mist is entirely gone, and the air inside the shelter has grown warmer, heated by the steam tent that now radiates a gentle warmth into the surrounding space. You can feel the heat on your face when you stand close to the tent, a soft, damp warmth like standing near a bath, and you watch the way the canvas billows slightly with the internal pressure, a subtle breathing motion that makes the tent seem alive. The staves inside are changing, though you cannot see them directly. You can imagine the oak fibers relaxing, the wood becoming pliant, the stubborn memory of the straight grain slowly yielding to the curved shape that the hoops will impose. The process cannot be rushed. If the wood does not steam long enough, it will crack when the hoops are driven. If it steams too long, it will become too soft, losing its strength. You trust the feeling of the time, an inner clock that has been calibrated by many barrels and many mornings, and you let the steam do its quiet work without interference. From the brewery building, a door opens and a drayman steps out into the yard, a large man in a leather apron who nods at you without speaking and walks to the stable at the far end, his boots slapping the cobblestones with a heavy, unhurried pace. He disappears into the dim interior of the stable, and you hear the soft whicker of a horse, the jingle of harness, and then the quiet murmur of a man talking to his animal in low, soothing tones. The ordinary sound of the brewery coming to life is a gentle accompaniment to your steaming, a reminder that you are part of a larger rhythm, but it does not disturb your focus. You turn back to the tent, noting that the hissing has grown slightly louder again, a sign that the boiler pressure is climbing, and you walk to the valve and turn it down a fraction, the sound subsiding into its steady, sighing whisper. A small puddle of condensed water has formed at the base of the tent, the water dripping down the inside of the canvas and seeping out under the bottom edge, staining the sawdust a dark brown. The puddle reflects the sky like a tiny dark mirror, and you watch it grow by incremental degrees, each new drip sending a slow ripple across its surface that widens and fades. The steam curls from the top of the tent in a continuous, lazy column, a twisting ribbon of white that rises toward the rafters and then dissipates, merging with the general humidity that now fills the shelter. The whole space has become a small enclosed world of warmth and moisture, a microclimate that smells of wet oak and canvas and coal smoke, and you feel a deep sense of calm settling over you, the kind of peace that comes from standing inside a process that cannot be hurried, that moves at the pace of wood and water and fire. After a long, indeterminate span of time, you sense that the steaming is complete. There is no bell, no signal, simply a subtle shift in the sound of the wood inside the tent, a lower, more muffled note when you tap the canvas with your knuckle, and a change in the color of the steam escaping through the weave, now thinner and less white, indicating that the staves are fully heated through and the moisture is beginning to wick out of the surface fibers. You walk to the boiler one more time and you close the valve completely, cutting off the flow of steam with a final, decisive turn of the brass handle. The hissing stops abruptly and the sudden silence is almost shocking, a void of sound that makes your ears ring for a moment before the softer background noises reassert themselves, the distant rumble of a cart, the cooing of the pigeons on the roof, the gentle hiss of the boiler as it cools. You leave the tent in place for a few minutes more, allowing the residual steam to soak into the wood, and you spend those minutes tidying the area, coiling the leather hose loosely on the ground, fetching the windlass from its spot near the bench. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, you lift the bottom edge of the canvas tent and peel it upward, uncovering the staves with the care of someone unveiling a delicate object. The canvas slides over the wood with a wet, sucking sound, and the steam billows out in a great soft cloud, filling the shelter with a final burst of warmth and the rich, sweet scent of heated oak. You raise the tent clear of the top and drape it over the rack to dry, its inside glistening with moisture, and you turn to look at the stave assembly. The oak is now a deeper color, a warm, ruddy brown like well-brewed tea, and the wood gleams with a faint sheen of condensed steam that beads along the grain lines. The staves are steaming hot, and the air around them shimmers with the last traces of vapor, a gentle, wispy halo that rises and fades. You can see that the wood has softened. When you press your thumb against a stave, it leaves a faint, temporary impression that slowly springs back, a sign that the oak is now pliable and ready to bend. The cone stands there waiting, its pale transformation complete, and you reach for the windlass, ready to begin the slow work of drawing the flared bottom inward and cinching the barrel into its final shape. But that will be the next chapter of the quiet, patient story unfolding in this brewery yard on this ordinary morning long ago. The canvas tent hangs on its rack, dark with moisture and gently steaming in the cool air, and you turn your full attention to the upright stave assembly that now stands before you. Its oak staves heated through and softened, their color deepened to a warm ruddy brown, the faint sheen of condensed water still tracing the lines of the grain. The morning has advanced, the sun is higher, and the light inside the shelter has lost its earlier grayness, taking on a clearer, golden quality that picks out the details of the wood and the iron and the packed earth floor. The staves are ready to be drawn in at the bottom, cinched together to form the lower chime of the barrel, and the tool for this work is the windlass that sits near the bench, a simple machine of wood and rope that waits with the patience of an old helper. You walk to it, your boots pressing softly into the sawdust, and you take hold of the windlass by its sturdy frame, dragging it across the ground with a series of low, scraping sounds that do not disturb the quiet so much as add another layer to it. A brief, earthy noise that fades as soon as you stop. The windlass consists of a heavy wooden base, 2 upright posts, and a horizontal drum between them. The drum wrapped with a length of stout rope that has been waxed to a dark, sticky sheen, its fibers smooth and firm from long use. A wooden handle is fixed to one end of the drum, a simple crank with a grip worn to the shape of many hands, the wood polished to a dull gleam. You position the windlass a few feet from the stave assembly, aligning it so the rope will pull straight and true, and you kneel down beside the base, checking that the frame is steady, that the drum turns without binding, that the rope is free of tangles. The handle rotates with a soft, woody creak when you test it, a sound like an old door swinging slowly on its hinges, and the rope shifts on the drum, uncoiling a few inches before you stop. You take the free end of the rope and you carry it to the flared bottom of the stave assembly, where the wide ends of the staves rest on the ground in a rough, uneven circle, still hot from the steam, the heat rising to meet your face as you crouch close. You loop the rope around the outside of the stave bundle, just above the very bottom edge, wrapping it twice to distribute the pressure evenly, and you tie a secure knot, a timber hitch, that will hold fast under tension but can be released easily when the time comes. The rope bites into the wood with a soft, muffled sound, and you tug on it to test the hold, feeling the staves shift a fraction, a tiny collective movement accompanied by the faintest groan of hot oak. You then stand and return to the windlass, taking the handle in both hands, your palms settling into the familiar, smooth depression of the grip, and you pause for a moment, looking at the stave assembly, at the rope stretching taut between the drum and the oak, a dark line against the paler ground. The steam still curls lazily from the top of the staves, the last wisps rising into the rafters where they catch the sunlight and glow like fine silk. You begin to turn the windlass handle, not with haste, but with a slow, even motion, a steady rotation that takes several seconds to complete each full circle. The drum creaks as it turns, a rhythmic, low-pitched sound that repeats with each revolution, and the rope tightens, the slack disappearing inch by inch, the fibers straightening under the load. The staves at the bottom of the assembly resist at first, the flared cone holding its shape, and you can feel that resistance transmitted through the rope and the drum and the handle, a gentle but firm pushback against your hands that tells you the oak is still strong, still remembering its straight form. You continue to turn, your motion unhurried, your breathing slow and deep, and you watch the bottom of the assembly as the first small movement occurs. The staves, which have been splayed outward like the petals of an open flower, begin to draw together, their outer edges creeping inward by a hair's breadth, the gaps between them narrowing. The sound that accompanies this movement is a low, prolonged creaking, not a series of sharp cracks, but a single, continuous groan that seems to come from deep within the wood. The sound of the lignin and cellulose fibers bending under the heat, rearranging themselves into a new and permanent curve. The rope hums with tension, a faint, thrumming note that you can feel in your palms, and you pause your turning for a moment to let the wood adjust, the groan subsiding into a soft, residual sigh. You wipe the sweat from your brow with the back of your sleeve, the air inside the shelter now warm and humid from the steam, and you begin turning again, resuming the same slow, patient rotation. Each revolution of the windlass brings the bottom of the stave bundle a little closer together, and you turn the handle with a constancy that matches the slow beat of your heart, never rushing, never applying more force than is needed. The oak is pliable now, softened by the steam into a state where it will bend without fracturing, and you can see the gentle, even curve taking shape as the bottom circumference reduces. The staves on one side move a touch faster than the others, and you watch for any unevenness, pausing your turning to walk around the assembly and check the gaps, your hand resting lightly on the hot wood, feeling for any stave that might be binding or twisting. The heat from the oak warms your fingers through the calluses, a dry, penetrating warmth that seems to sink into your bones, and you press gently on a stave that has lagged behind, encouraging it inward with a soft push until it aligns with its neighbors. The rope creaks again as you resume your place at the windlass, and you fit your hands back onto the handle, the wood now slightly damp from your earlier grip. The sun has moved another fraction across the sky, and the shaft of light that earlier fell near the bench has now stretched to touch the edge of the windlass, illuminating the dust motes that float around the drum, making them look like a swirl of tiny golden flakes suspended in the air. The world outside the shelter is waking up more fully. You can hear the distant clatter of a cart on the cobbled street beyond the brewery wall, the sharp ring of iron-shod hooves, the voice of a costermonger calling out his wares in a sing-song tone that carries but does not intrude. Inside the shelter, however, the only sounds are the creak of the windlass, the groan of the bending oak, and the steady, whispery hiss of the last steam escaping from the top of the staves. You turn the handle again and again, each revolution a small, deliberate act that draws the staves in by another fraction of an inch. The bottom gap has now closed considerably. Where before you could have slipped your hand between two staves, now only a thin sliver of light shows through, a bright golden line that narrows as you watch. The rope is taut as an iron bar, its fibers stretched to their limit, and the windlass drum groans under the strain, a deeper note that joins the chorus of creaks and ticks. You pause once more to check the knot at the stave end, crouching down to inspect the timber hitch, ensuring it has not slipped, and you see that the pressure of the rope has left a faint, polished mark on the oak, a burnished ring that will disappear under the permanent hoops later. You run your finger along the rope, feeling its tightness, the slight vibration that courses through it like a plucked string, and you return to the windlass, satisfied that all is holding. The bottom of the stave assembly is now almost completely closed, the ends of the staves clustering together, their edges meeting, the bevels seating against one another with a soft, woody click that signals the final approach to the chime. You slow your turning even further now, making micro-adjustments, tiny quarter turns of the handle that nudge the staves those last few millimeters, bringing them into perfect contact. The groan of the wood has softened into a series of quiet, settling clicks and pops, the sound of the fibers accepting their new shape, and the barrel to be stands before you, its bottom now a tight, circular ring of oak ends, all touching, the flared cone transformed into a shape that begins to resemble a true barrel, narrow what will be the top, swelling outward in the middle, and now cinched tight at the bottom. You release the windlass handle, and you step back, letting the tension hold, the rope taking the strain while you wipe your hands on your trousers and look at the work. The staves are still hot, radiating that gentle bakery-like warmth into the air, and the whole assembly seems to hum with the stored energy of the bent wood, a subtle, vibrating presence that you can sense more than hear. The next step is to hold this new shape with a temporary hoop, a light iron ring that will keep the bottom chime secure while you remove the windlass and continue with the permanent hoops. You walk to the rack where the temporary hoops hang. Selecting one that matches the approximate diameter of the newly closed chime, a ring of dark iron with a dull, powdery surface, slightly smaller than the cinched bottom so it will grip tightly when driven on. You carry it back to the assembly, the iron cool in your hands despite the warmth of the air, and you kneel at the base of the staves. The bottom ends are now a neat circle, the grain of each stave end visible as a small pale oval. The steam still rising faintly from the cracks. You fit the temporary hoop over the top of the assembly, letting it slide down the sloping staves, the iron ringing against the oak with a soft musical clink as it descends. A series of light notes that stop when the hoop comes to rest against the cinched bottom, too small to slip over the flared widest point, sitting loosely below the bilge. You then take the wooden driver and the hammer, and you begin the slow, familiar process of driving the temporary hoop upward, tapping it gently from below, walking around the barrel in a slow circle, each tap a soft, dull thud that echoes once and fades. The hoop climbs, fraction by fraction, its inner edge scraping the oak with a faint, hissing rasp, and the staves compress further, the bevels grinding together with a low, sandy sound. You tap, you check, you tap again, moving with the same patient rhythm that has governed every step this morning, until the temporary hoop seats firmly around the very bottom of the chime, holding the stave ends in a tight, unyielding embrace. The iron ring gleams with a dull, metallic luster against the dark, hot oak. With the temporary hoop in place, you return to the windlass, and you reverse the handle slowly, releasing the tension on the rope, the drum turning backward with a soft clicking that comes from a simple wooden pawl, disengaged. The rope goes slack, drooping to the ground, and you untie the timber hitch from the stave bundle, pulling the rope free and coiling it loosely on the windlass drum, the hemp still warm from the stretching. You push the windlass aside, clearing the workspace, and you stand before the barrel shape, now a tapered wooden vase, wide in the middle and narrow at both ends, the bottom held secure by the temporary hoop, the top still cinched by the truss hoop you placed earlier. The oak is a uniform, warm brown, glowing in the golden light that now fills the shelter, and the barrel seems to possess a quiet dignity, a sense of having been coaxed patiently into existence from a pile of flat staves and a length of rope. You place your hand on the swell of the bilge, feeling the smooth, continuous curve, the wood still hot to the touch, and you let your palm rest there, absorbing the warmth and the subtle vibration of the bent fibers. A sensation like the hum of a bell that has just been struck and still resonates, though the sound has long faded. You stand like that for a time, motionless, the shelter around you quiet, except for the distant, muffled sounds of the brewery and the soft ticking of the cooling iron hoops on their rack. The barrel is not finished yet. It still needs the permanent chime hoops, the bilge hoops, the crows, and the heads, but it has crossed a threshold, moving from a collection of parts to a single unified object, and you acknowledge that change with a small inward nod before you turn to the next task, leaving the warm breathing shape to cool slowly in the still air of the morning. The barrel shape stands before you in the warm, still air of the shelter, its oak staves now bent into the gentle swelling curve of a proper cask, the bottom held tight by the temporary hoop you drove on after the windlass drew the ends together. The wood is cooling slowly, the deep, ruddy brown of the steamed oak fading by subtle degrees toward the paler honey tone it will wear when fully dry, and a few last wisps of vapor curl from the top opening, rising like thin threads of white silk into the dimness of the rafters. The truss hoop still grips the narrow top, a dark, temporary band that has held the staves in their comb since the very beginning, and you know the time has come to replace this temporary restraint with the first permanent iron hoop, the one that will bite into the oak at the top chime and never be removed. You turn from the barrel and walk to the far end of the shelter where the permanent hoops are stored, your footsteps slow and deliberate, the sawdust muffling the sound to a soft, shuffling rhythm that matches your breathing. The hoop rack is a simple wooden frame with pegs set in rows, and from it hang the iron rings of various sizes, each one forged by the smith to fit a specific place on the barrel, wide bilge hoops, narrower chime hoops, and the quarter hoops that will sit between. They hang in silence, their dark surfaces coated with a fine brownish scale from the forge, a coating that feels slightly rough to the touch and leaves a faint metallic smell on your fingers, a scent of rust and fire and old rain. You stand before the rack, letting your eyes travel across the row of chime hoops, each one subtly different in diameter, and you select one that looks by eye to be the right size for the top, a ring of dark, heavy iron perhaps 2 fingers wide and a ½ inch thick, its surface pitted with tiny craters from the forging process, the weld that closes the circle visible as a slight, irregular bump. You lift it from its peg with both hands, feeling its weight settle into your palms, a solid, reassuring heft that speaks of density and strength. The iron is cool, so cool that it seems to draw the warmth from your skin, and you turn it over slowly, examining the inner edge where it will bite into the oak, a slightly sharper corner that has been roughened by the smith's file to give it grip. The hoop makes a low, dull clink when you rest it briefly on the stone ledge, a single note that resonates for only a heartbeat before the quiet of the shelter swallows it whole. You carry the hoop back to the barrel, cradling it in your arms like a heavy, circular burden, and you set it down on the ground beside the stave assembly, leaning it against the temporary hoop at the bottom so it will not roll. Now you need to measure the circumference of the barrel near the top chime to confirm that the hoop you have chosen will fit with the necessary tightness, and you reach into your canvas bag for the length of string and the small folding rule you placed there in the first quiet moments of the morning. The string is clean and white, a soft cotton cord that has been used for this purpose many times. Its end slightly frayed, but its length still true, and you pull it from the bag, feeling its familiar, silky texture slip through your fingers. The rule is made of boxwood, its surface yellowed with age and marked with fine black lines that indicate inches and fractions of inches, the brass hinge at its center polished by years of folding and unfolding, a tiny, bright detail in the muted palette of the shelter. You open the rule with a soft click, the 2 halves locking into a single straight line, and you set it on the bench where it will be close at hand, its markings catching the golden light that now angles more sharply through the open side of the shelter. Then you take the string, and you stand before the barrel, facing the narrow top where the truss hoop still sits, the staves rising in a tight circle, their bevels pressed snugly together. The steam-heated wood now cool enough to touch without discomfort. You place one end of the string against a stave, holding it there with your thumb, and you begin to wrap the string around the circumference of the barrel just below the truss hoop, at the exact spot where the permanent chime hoop will eventually rest. The string unspools from your hand with a quiet, whispering sound, the white cord contrasting sharply with the dark, ruddy oak, and you guide it carefully around the curve, keeping it level, not allowing it to sag or twist, your other hand following behind to smooth it flat. When you have encircled the barrel once, the string overlaps the starting point, and you pinch it with your finger and thumb at the exact spot where it meets the beginning, capturing the circumference as a single, defined length. You then release the string from around the barrel, holding the pinched point securely, and you walk back to the bench, the string now marked by the gentle curve it has learned from the oak. At the bench, you lay the string straight along the opened rule, aligning the pinched point with the 0 mark, and you let the rest of the string stretch out across the yellow boxwood, the white cord lying limp and obedient. You read the measurement with a slow, careful gaze, noting the inches and the fractional divisions, the black lines sharp against the pale wood, and you hold the number in your mind, a simple, unremarkable figure that is nonetheless the key to the next step. You then lift the iron hoop from the ground, bringing it to the bench, and you repeat the measuring process on the inside circumference of the hoop, pressing the string against the inner edge, walking your fingers along the circle until the string meets itself, the iron cold and dark against the white cord. You pinch the meeting point, lay the string on the rule, and compare the 2 measurements. The hoop's inside circumference is slightly smaller than the barrel's outside circumference of the chime, a difference of perhaps a ¼ inch, exactly the margin needed to ensure that the hoop will compress the staves tightly, biting into the oak rather than merely slipping over it. The hoop is the right size. You nod to yourself, a small inward confirmation, and you coil the string back into a neat figure 8 and tuck it into the bag, the rule folding shut with another soft, satisfying click before it follows the string into the canvas depths. You lift the iron hoop again, feeling its weight anew, its coolness seeping through the calluses on your palms, and you carry it to the barrel, this time with the deliberate intention of positioning it for the final drive. The top of the barrel is still encircled by the slender truss hoop, and the permanent chime hoop must be slipped over the narrow top and allowed to rest loosely on the flared cone of staves, sitting above its final destination, waiting for the hammer and driver to coax it down. You stand at the barrel's side, the hoop held in both hands, and you raise it up over your head, a slow, careful motion that brings the dark ring into the light, the iron briefly silhouetted against the pale sky before it descends. You lower the hoop over the very top of the barrel, guiding it with the tips of your fingers, and it drops down past the truss hoop, a soft, ringing contact that sends a brief humming vibration through the iron as it settles onto the tapering cone of staves a few inches below the top. The hoop comes to rest at a natural stopping point, the diameter of the cone having widened just enough to hold it, and it sits there, slightly askew, one side a little higher than the other, a temporary untidy placement that you will correct with patience and small adjustments. The iron looks dark and heavy against the pale brown oak, a stark geometric band that throws a sharp shadow on the wood, and the contrast of materials speaks of the marriage between the rigid metal and the resilient fiber, a combination that has held barrels together for centuries. You step back to look at the hoop from a distance, your eyes tracing its line, and you see that it is tilted, resting unevenly on the staves, its top edge not parallel to the truss hoop above it. This will not do. The hoop must be driven down level and true, and so the first task is to nudge it into a horizontal position, seating it lightly so that the tapping can proceed evenly around the circle. You approach the barrel once more, your hands reaching out to the iron hoop, and you begin a series of very small adjustments, pressing down on the high side with a gentle, steady pressure, feeling the hoop shift against the oak with a low grating sound, the mill scale on its inner surface scraping against the wood fibers and leaving a faint, dark trace. The hoop resists slightly, its weight combined with the friction of the rough inner edge, and you rock it gently, easing it down millimeter by millimeter until the top edge aligns with an imaginary plane, parallel to the truss hoop and to the ground. You then walk slowly around the barrel, checking the level from every angle, your eyes squinting against the light that now floods the shelter with a warm, amber glow. From one side, the hoop appears level. From another, a tiny discrepancy catches your eye, the left side sitting a thread's width higher than the right, and you return to that spot, pressing down with your palm until the iron settles with a barely audible creak, a sound like a distant door closing deep within the wood. The hoop is now placed loosely, resting on the tapered staves at a point above its final destination, a patient, dark ring that waits for the hammer and driver to begin their slow, rhythmic work. You touch the iron one last time, feeling its cool, gritty surface, the tiny pits and irregularities that the smith's hammer left behind, and you note a small raised burr near the weld, a rough spot that might catch on the wood if not attended to, so you fetch a small file from the bench, a narrow, flat tool with a worn wooden handle, and you draw it lightly across the burr a few times, the metal singing a faint high-pitched note that softens as the burr is reduced to a smooth, dull patch. The iron filings fall to the sawdust, tiny dark specks that glitter for a moment in the sunlight before disappearing, and you wipe the hoop with your sleeve, removing the last traces of the filing, the iron now smooth to the touch all the way around. You return the file to the bench, your movements unhurried, your mind quiet and focused, and you stand beside the barrel, one hand resting on the swell of the bilge, the other hanging loose at your side. The yard beyond the shelter has grown busier. You can hear the brewery workers moving barrels in the storage cellar beneath the main building, the deep, hollow rumble of casks rolling over stone, the faint, echoing shouts of men coordinating their labor. A dray horse harnessed to an empty wagon clops slowly into the yard, its hooves ringing on the cobblestones, and the driver calls a soft greeting to someone you cannot see, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that blends into the background hum of the brewery's daily life. The sun is now well above the rooftops, a bright, hazy orb that casts soft shadows and warms the air, and you can feel the gentle heat on the back of your neck when you step out of the shelter for a moment, turning your face upward, closing your eyes, letting the light wash over you in a wave of quiet comfort. When you open your eyes, You look back at the shelter, at the barrel with its dark hoop resting loosely near the top, and the sight fills you with a sense of calm anticipation, the knowledge that the next stage of the work will be simple and repetitive, a long, slow series of taps that will join this hoop to the oak forever. You walk back into the shade, the temperature dropping a degree or two, the sawdust cool under your boots, and you take up your position near the barrel, the wooden driver and the hammer waiting on the bench, their handles facing you, ready for your grip. But before you begin the driving, you take a final moment to inspect the barrel as a whole, moving around it in a slow, contemplative circle, your eyes taking in every detail. The staves are still slightly warm, their surfaces smooth and clean, and the curve of the bilge, the widest part of the barrel, swells outward with a graceful, symmetrical arc that pleases the eye. The bottom chime, held by the temporary hoop, is a tight, neat circle of oak ends, the grain of each stave visible as a small, pale ellipse, the bevels meeting with a precision that speaks of careful work. The top, still held by the truss hoop, is similarly tight, the staves rising like the sides of a wooden goblet, the opening a perfect circle of empty space through which you can see the slate roof above. The permanent chime hoop sits just below the truss hoop, a dark, heavy ring that marks the boundary between the temporary and the enduring, and you can already imagine it driven down, embedded in the oak, its iron biting into the fibers and holding them fast for years to come. You reach out and you touch the hoop again, not to adjust it, but simply to feel its presence. The cool, solid reality of the metal against the living warmth of the wood, a contact that seems to hum with the potential energy of the work ahead. You let your hand linger there for a long, slow breath, and then you withdraw it, stepping back and folding your arms across your chest, the image of the barrel fixing itself in your mind like a quiet, calming picture that will continue to unfold as the day progresses, each small step a note in a long, slow melody of craftsmanship and patience. You stand beside the barrel, the dark iron chime hoop resting loosely on the tapered staves just below the slender truss hoop, its weight held by the widening cone of oak, its position level and true after your careful adjustments. The morning light, now a clear golden wash, falls across the shelter floor, illuminating the sawdust, the bench, and the curved flank of the barrel, making the grain of the oak shine with a muted amber glow. The time has come to begin driving the hoop down to its permanent seat, and you turn to the bench where the wooden driver and the iron hammer lie waiting, their shakes familiar and reassuring. You pick up the driver first, a short, thick piece of beechwood about the length of your forearm, rounded at one end into a smooth, mushroom-like head that has been compacted by countless blows, the fibers polished to a dull, silken sheen. The handle end is narrower, shaped to fit comfortably in your palm, and you wrap your fingers around it, feeling the warmth of the wood, the slight tackiness of the old finish, the way it balances with a forward heavy heft that will guide each tap. You lift it and give it a small experimental toss in your hand, the motion automatic, a habit that connects you to all the barrels that have come before. Then you pick up the hammer, its head dark with age and faintly pitted, the iron cool against your fingers, the handle a smooth oval shaft of hickory that has absorbed the oils of your skin over many working days, making it feel almost like an extension of your arm. The hammer is not heavy, it is a light, one-handed tool meant for precision rather than force, and its weight, perhaps 2 pounds, swings with an easy balance when you test the motion, a short, slow arc that ends with the face hovering just above the driver. You hold both tools, the driver in your left hand and the hammer in your right, and you move to the barrel, positioning yourself so that you face the hoop at a slight angle, your body relaxed, your feet planted a comfortable shoulder-width apart on the packed sawdust. You take a moment to look at the hoop up close, its dark, pitted surface absorbing the light, the inner edge rough where the iron was filed to grip the oak. The hoop sits perhaps 2 inches above the line where it will eventually rest, the top chime of the barrel still an open, ungrooved ring of stave ends, and you can see the tiny gap between the inner face of the iron and the wood on the side where the taper has not yet forced a tight fit. You reach out with the driver, not to strike yet, but simply to touch the hoop, placing the rounded head gently against the top edge of the iron, feeling the contact through the wood, a hard, unyielding resistance that transmits a faint metallic sensation up into your palm. You adjust your grip on the driver, settling it more firmly. And you raise the hammer a few inches, letting its weight do the work, and you bring it down in a soft, controlled tap against the flat end of the driver. The sound is not a sharp crack, but a low, woody thud, the beach absorbing the shock and passing it into the iron, and the hoop responds with a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, a slide of perhaps a 32nd of an inch on the side where the driver touched. A fine dark dust of mill scale, loosened by the vibration, sifts down from the iron and settles on the pale oak below, a tiny dark smudge that marks the beginning of the journey. You pause after that first tap, listening to the echo of the sound as it fades into the quiet of the shelter, and you feel the barrel's response, a subtle, deep hum that travels through the wood and into the ground, a vibration that is more sensation than noise. The staves, still warm in their core, seem to tighten slightly around the hoop, their bevels grinding together with a faint sandy sound, and you stand still, breathing evenly, allowing the materials to settle before you proceed. You shift your position slightly to the right, stepping around the barrel in a slow clockwise path, the sawdust crunching softly under your boots, and you place the driver against the hoop at a new point, roughly opposite the first tap, to keep the descent even. The rounded end of the driver finds the iron with a quiet, ringing contact, and you raise the hammer again, the motion smooth and unhurried, your wrist doing the work, your shoulder relaxed. The next tap is identical to the first, the same soft thud, the same tiny slide of the hoop, the same sprinkle of dark dust, the same pause as the sound evaporates into the air. You do not tap twice in the same spot. Instead, you move again, taking a small step, repositioning the driver, tapping, moving, tapping, building a slow circular rhythm that carries you round the barrel in a patient, almost meditative progression. Each tap is a small, discrete event, and between them stretches a quiet space filled only by your breathing and the distant, muffled sounds of the brewery yard. The rolling of a cart, the soft whicker of a horse, the distant clink of a boiler door. These background noises are so constant and so gentle that they become part of the silence itself, a layer of sound that your mind accepts and then ignores, leaving only the rhythm of the tapping to hold your attention. As you circle the barrel, you keep your eyes on the hoop, watching how it responds to the taps. The iron is descending, but very slowly, the gap between its bottom edge and the final chime line narrowing by tiny, almost invisible increments. The staves, tapered as they are, force the hoop to stretch ever so slightly as it moves down, and this tension is what will hold the barrel together, the iron's resistance creating a constant, inward pressure. You can see the hoop beginning to bite into the oak near the top, the sharp inner edge scoring a faint, dark line into the wood, a line that will deepen as the hoop travels further, eventually embedding itself into the fibers and becoming part of the barrel's structure. The sound of each tap changes subtly as the hoop tightens. The woody thud becomes slightly higher in pitch, a cleaner, sharper note that hints at the increasing tension, like a string being tuned up to its proper pitch. You pause occasionally to check the hoop's level, stepping back a pace and crouching down so your eyes are on a plane with the top edge of the iron. From this angle, you can see if any side is lagging, and if you spot a slight high spot, you return to that side and give it an extra tap or two, a gentle, corrective nudge that brings it back into alignment before you resume your steady, even circuit. The adjustments are tiny, a matter of a tap here and a tap there, and they blend seamlessly into the overall rhythm, never disrupting the slow, peaceful flow of the work. The driver in your left hand is growing warm from the repeated blows, the beechwood absorbing the heat of compression, and you pause to shift it in your grip, rotating it slightly so a fresh part of the rounded end contacts the hoop. The head of the driver is speckled with dark marks from the iron, tiny transfers of metal that look like freckles on the pale wood, and you brush them away with your thumb, the dark dust falling to the sawdust and disappearing. The hammer in your right hand feels light and responsive, its handle fitting the curve of your fingers like a handshake, and you flex your grip once, twice, to keep the muscles loose and easy. There is no fatigue in this work, only a gentle, sustained attention that feels like a form of resting, the body moving with a slow, automatic grace that the mind observes without directing. You continue tapping, the hoop now a full half-inch lower than when you began, the gap between the iron and the truss hoop above it widening, the barrel beginning to look more finished, more permanent, the dark ring asserting its authority over the pale oak. The smell of the work is a blend of warm wood and hot iron, the latter carrying a faint, metallic tang that reminds you of the forge where the hoop was made, a scent of coal and sparks, and the hammer of the smith shaping the glowing ring into a perfect circle. That scent mingles with the ever-present maltiness from the brewery and the clean, dry smell of the sawdust, creating a rich, layered atmosphere that fills the shelter and seems to slow time even further. You are now on your fourth circuit of the barrel. The path you walk a well-worn circle in the sawdust, your footprints overlapping into a faint, continuous track. The taps have become so regular that they begin to blend into a single, extended rhythm, a slow, pulsing beat that you can feel in your chest, a pattern that your body knows without counting. You tap, you step, you tap, you step, the driver and hammer working together like the two halves of a single, deliberate action, the hoop sliding deeper by the minute. The sun has moved perceptibly, the shaft of light that earlier fell on the bench now touching the base of the barrel, illuminating the temporary hoop at the bottom chime, and casting a long, sharp shadow across the floor. The shadow of the barrel itself stretches toward the stack of staves, a dark, distorted shape that mimics the curve of the bilge and the straight lines of the hoops, a silent companion that follows the barrel through the afternoon. You notice these things without breaking your rhythm, your mind free to wander gently, taking in the small, peaceful details, the way a single strand of cobweb, still beaded with steam from earlier, drifts slowly in the nearly still air, the way a woodlouse, disturbed by a vibration, creeps out from under a stave and then, finding nowhere to go, retreats back into the darkness, the way the smell of the brewery changes as the wind shifts, bringing a brief, sweet note of fermenting grains. These observations are not distractions, but part of the work, part of the quiet, patient world that you inhabit, a world where each moment is full and calm and undemanding. You stop your circuit at the front of the barrel, directly facing the open side of the shelter, and you lower the hammer and driver to your sides, letting your arms hang loose for a moment. The hoop is now visibly lower. A full inch of dark iron now separates the top edge of the permanent hoop from the bottom edge of the truss hoop above, and the oak between them is compressed, the grain compressed into a tighter, denser pattern that catches the light differently, shinier and smoother than the wood above. You reach out with your free hand and you touch the oak just below the hoop, feeling the warmth that radiates from the compressed fibers, a gentle, livable heat that is no longer hot but still noticeably above the temperature of the air. You run your fingers along the grain, tracing the tiny vertical lines, and you feel the slight ridge that the hoop has created, a shallow, smooth depression where the iron has begun to sink into the wood. It is a satisfying sensation, the evidence of progress that you can feel as well as see, and you stand there for a long moment, simply touching the barrel, your eyes half closed, your breathing deep and slow. The shelter is quiet now except for the creak of a settling rafter and the coo of the pigeon that has returned to its spot on the roof, its soft, gurgling call, a gentle counterpoint to the rhythmic tapping you have just suspended. You then resume the work, lifting the driver and hammer once more, picking up the rhythm where you left off, as if you had never stopped. The hoop continues its descent, and you notice that the sound has changed yet again. It is now a crisp, solid report, a sound that seems to indicate the hoop has fully engaged with the taper and is now stretching, its inner surface biting firmly into the oak. The tap of the driver produces a note that rings for a fraction of a second, a clear, metallic ping that is dampened quickly by the wood, and you can feel the rebound of each blow through the handle of the driver, a small, springy kick that troubles up your arm. The hoop is moving more slowly now, the resistance increasing as it approaches the wider part of the chime, and you adjust your tapping accordingly, giving each blow just a little more force, a slightly higher lift of the hammer, but still within the gentle range that will not crack the iron or split the wood. The slow, steady rhythm continues, a cadence that you match to your breathing, inhaling as you raise the hammer, exhaling as you tap, a union of body and tool that feels as natural as walking or swimming. The work becomes a kind of meditation, a focus that is not focused on anything in particular, but simply present, aware of the hoop and the driver and the hammer and the wood, aware of the light and the smell and the sound, aware of the slow passage of time that is marked not by minutes, but by the gradual incremental journey of the iron down the staves. By the time you pause again, The hoop has traveled perhaps an inch and a half from its starting position, and it now rests solidly on the taper, the bottom edge aligned with the point where the staves begin their final, gentle flare toward the chime. It is not yet seated in its final groove, but it is well on its way. The hardest part of the driving still ahead, but the rhythm now firmly established. You step back from the barrel, placing the driver and hammer on the bench with a soft, precise clunk, and you stretch your arms upward, feeling the gentle pull of your shoulders, the pleasant tiredness that comes not from exhaustion, but from sustained, careful effort. You look at the barrel, its shape now more defined, the dark hoop, a clear marker of the boundary between the top opening and the swelling bilge, and you feel a quiet satisfaction, a sense of having moved the work forward with patience and care. The sun is higher still, the shadows shorter, and the yard beyond the shelter is alive with the ordinary sounds of the brewery's afternoon. But inside the shelter, the peace remains, wrapped around the barrel like a blanket, holding everything in its calm, unhurried embrace. You will continue the driving soon, and the hoop will travel the rest of the way to its final seat. But for now, you simply stand and breathe. The hammer and driver resting, the barrel waiting, the day unfolding with the slow, gentle grace of a story told in soft, measured tones. The wooden driver, still warm from the work already done, rests in your left hand as you face the barrel, the dark iron hoop now sitting lower on the taper. Its bottom edge perhaps an inch and a half from the loose starting position, its top edge a clear, defined line against the pale oak. The sun has climbed higher, the shadows in the shelter shortening further, the golden light now falling more directly on the barrel's flank and casting a bright, narrow highlight along the swell of the bilge. You lift the hammer in your right hand, feeling its familiar weight settle into your grip, and you place the rounded head of the driver against the top edge of the hoop once more, choosing a spot just to the left of where your last tap landed many minutes ago. The contact between the beechwood and the iron is solid and reassuring, a small, hard point of connection that links your arm to the barrel, and you raise the hammer in a short, easy arc, letting it fall with a controlled, gentle momentum. The tap produces a sound that has changed since the earlier stages of the driving. It is now a sharper, cleaner note, less woody and more metallic, a clear, ringing ping that suggests the hoop is stretching, its inner surface biting firmly into the compressed oak. The sound hangs in the air for a brief moment, a single, bright note that fades quickly into the soft background hum of the brewery yard, and then you move, stepping to the right along the circular path you have worn into the sawdust, your boots finding the familiar, packed depressions of your earlier footprints. You reposition the driver on a new spot, roughly opposite the last point of contact, keeping the descent as even as your iron hand can manage. The rounded beech head touches the iron with a faint, metallic tick, and you bring the hammer down again, a second tap that matches the first in force and tone, a quiet, controlled percussion that joins the first note in a slow, irregular rhythm. The hoop slides downward, the movement barely visible, perhaps a few hundredths of an inch, but you can feel it through the driver, a tiny juddering shift that transmits itself up through the wood and into your palm, a sensation like a very soft, distant click. The dark dust of the mill scale, now mostly worn away from the inner surface, no longer sifts down as it did before, but a fine, almost invisible powder of oak fibers, abraded by the iron, collects in a faint brown ring just below the hoop's lower edge, a delicate soft line that catches the sunlight and glows like a dusting of cinnamon. You pause after the second tap, not out of fatigue, but out of the careful habit of checking the hoop's level, and you crouch down, bringing your eyes to the same plane as the iron ring. From this angle, the hoop appears level, its top edge parallel to the truss hoop still sitting above it, the gap between the two hoops now a wide, even band of pale oak that has been compressed into a smoother, denser surface, the grain lines pressed closer together. You rise and continue, the driver finding the next spot, the hammer rising and falling, the rhythm re-establishing itself. A slow, patient cadence that seems to have no beginning and no end, only the steady, repeating pattern of the work. As the hoop travels further down the taper, the resistance increases, and this change in the physical effort makes itself known through the subtle feedback of the tools. The driver, when struck, now rebounds a little more, a small, springy kick that you absorb by flexing your wrist slightly with each blow, a motion so automatic that you barely notice it. The sound of each tap has become a compound note, a blend of the bright ringing ping from the iron and a deeper, duller thump from the wood, the two elements combining into a single, satisfying tone that seems to resonate through the whole barrel. The staves themselves are not silent. As the hoop tightens, they continue to emit faint, creaking sounds, tiny groans and clicks that occur unpredictably, sometimes between taps, sometimes during, the oak fibers adjusting to the increasing compression with small vocal protests that sound almost like the settling of an old house at night. These creaks are so quiet that they barely register above the tapping, but they add a depth to the auditory landscape of the shelter, a soft, organic counterpoint to the metallic ring of the driver's work. You move around the barrel in your slow circle, step, tap, each circuit taking several minutes, the sawdust track beneath your feet growing more defined with every pass, the path now a visible, oval groove in the packed shavings. The motion of your body has become so regular that it feels like a quiet dance, a gentle, rhythmic sway that carries you around the barrel in a continuous, unhurried flow, your breathing matching the cadence of the hammer, inhaling on the lift, exhaling on the tap, a seamless union of body and work. Occasionally the hammer, in its short arc, misses the exact center of the driver's flat end, and the iron head glances against the hoop itself, producing a different, sharper sound, a bright, high clink that rings out like a small, distant bell. This sound is not unpleasant. It is clean and pure, and it cuts through the lower thud of the driver with a sudden, silvery clarity, a brief, accidental note that fades almost instantly into the quiet. You do not mind these small variations. They are part of the process, the natural result of a hand-guided tool, and they serve to punctuate the otherwise steady rhythm with an occasional unexpected accent. When a clink occurs, you pause briefly, adjusting your grip on the driver or the angle of the hammer, and then you resume the tapping, the rhythm picking up again without hurry or frustration. The hoop continues to sink, and you notice that its outer surface, the part you see and touch, is changing. The dark, pitted iron is acquiring a faint, silvery polish along its lower edge where the oak has burnished it, the repeated contact with the wood acting like a fine abrasive, smoothing the rough forge scale into a dull, metallic gleam. This polished edge catches the sunlight, a thin, bright line that circles the hoop, and it stands in contrast to the darker, untouched upper portion, creating a visible record of the hoop's progress, a mark of how far it has traveled and how far it has traveled and how far it still has to go. The time between your stops to check the level grows longer as your eye becomes more practiced, the subtle tilts becoming easier to spot and correct with a quick, extra tap on the high side. You develop a sense for the hoop's alignment, an intuition that tells you when a slight pressure on the driver without even striking will nudge the iron into a truer position, and you use this technique sparingly, leaning on the driver with a gentle, sustained push that moves the hoop by a hair's breadth. A silent, soft adjustment that barely registers as a conscious act. The hoop responds to these nudges with a low, grating sound, the iron scraping over the oak with a dry, whispery rasp, and then it settles, the tension redistributing around the circle, the barrel seeming to breathe out a tiny, relieved sigh. The air in the shelter, still warm and faintly humid from the earlier steaming, has taken on the added scent of the hot iron, a metallic, slightly bitter note that mingles with the oak and the malt and the sawdust, creating a complex, layered perfume that you breathe in deeply, the smells of the work becoming as familiar and comforting as the sounds and the movements. You are now on your 8th or 9th circuit, the exact count having faded from your awareness long ago, and the hoop has descended to within a half-inch of its final position at the top chime. The staves here are slightly wider than they are further up the cone, and the hoop must stretch to its maximum, the iron expanding just enough to accommodate the growing diameter while still exerting the crucial inward pressure that holds the barrel together. You can feel this stretch in the increased resistance, the way each tap now requires a slightly firmer stroke, the hammer lifted a fraction higher, the driver held a little more firmly against the top edge. The sound has changed again. It is now a deep, resonant tone, less of a ring and more of a chime, a sound that seems to come from the center of the barrel rather than from the point of contact, as if the whole structure is vibrating in sympathy with each blow. You pause more frequently now, not just to check the level, but to let the barrel rest, to allow the wood to adjust to the intense compression, the fibers slowly accepting their final, tightly bound arrangement. During these pauses, you stand still beside the barrel, your tools hanging loosely at your sides, and you listen to the silence that fills the space between the fading echoes of the last tap and the beginning of the next. The silence is not empty. It is filled with the soft, continuous hum of the brewery, the coo of the pigeons on the roof, the distant, rhythmic clop of a horse on the cobbles, the very faint, high-pitched hiss of steam escaping from a valve somewhere in the main building. These sounds, listened to in stillness, become strangely beautiful, a quiet, ever-present music that you might not notice if you were not standing so patiently, so attentively, in this small, shaded corner of the world. After one such pause, you lift the driver and the hammer again, and you begin the final stage of the descent, the last quarter-inch that will seat the hoop firmly into the oak at the precise point where the chime will be. Your taps become even more deliberate, each one a measured, thoughtful act, the hammer barely rising, the force coming more from a gentle, persistent pressure than from any real impact. The hoop moves by tiny, incremental steps, the movement so slight that it is almost imperceptible, and you rely on the feedback from the tools to tell you that progress is being made. The small juddering sensation through the driver, the deepening of the resonant chime sound, the gradual disappearance of the gap between the hoop's lower edge and the faint, scored line on the oak that marks the chime's eventual location. You circle the barrel one last time, driving the hoop those final few millimeters, and then you stop. The driver and hammer falling to your sides, your breathing slow and deep, a fine sheen of sweat on your forehead from the sustained, gentle effort. The hoop is now seated at the top chime, its upper edge aligned perfectly with the top of the staves, its dark iron band gripping the oak with a fierce, invisible pressure that will hold for decades. The truss hoop above it is still in place, but its job is nearly done. Soon it will be removed, and the barrel will stand held only by the permanent hoops, its shape secure, its staves bound into a single, indivisible whole. You reach out and run your finger along the top edge of the hoop, feeling the slight ridge where the iron meets the wood, a junction so tight that you cannot slip even a fingernail into the gap. The oak is cool to the touch now, the last heat of the steam having dissipated into the afternoon air, and the grain, compressed under the hoop, has a polished, almost waxy feel, smooth and dense and solid. You stand back and look at the barrel, the sun now casting a long, slanting beam across the shelter floor, illuminating the dust motes that swirl in the air, and you feel a quiet sense of completion, a calm, unhurried satisfaction that has no need for words or celebration. The rhythm of the hammers and the descent of the hoop have brought the barrel to this point, and you let the silence of the shelter wrap around you as you prepare to move on to the next step. The bilge hoops that will encircle the swelling middle of the cask, but that is for later, and for now, there is only the stillness, the light, and the quiet, breathing presence of the barrel that has come so far from the flat staves of the early morning. The top chime hoop is seated firmly now, its dark iron band gripping the oak at the very edge of the staves, and the barrel stands in the shelter with a new solidity, a sense of having passed from a temporary provisional shape into something more permanent. The truss hoop, the slender temporary ring that has held the top together since the earliest arrangement of the staves, is still in place just above the permanent chime hoop. Its work now complete, its work now might needed. You step close to the barrel, the sawdust soft under your boots, and you reach up to the truss hoop, fitting your fingers under its lower edge, the iron cool and slightly gritty against your skin. You lift it with a gentle, steady pressure, working it upward over the taper, the ring sliding against the oak with a faint, hissing scrape. It comes free from the top of the staves with a soft, ringing ping, and you carry it back to the rack, hanging it on its peg where it will wait for the next barrel, the next morning, the next slow process of assembly and bending. The top opening of the barrel is now exposed, a perfect circle of stave ends, the pale oak showing the fine, tight seams where the bevels meet, the inner edge already marked by the faint, scored line of the chime where the hoop has bitten in. With the truss hoop removed, the barrel's full profile is visible, and your attention turns now to the bilge, the widest part of the cask that swells outward in a gentle, symmetrical curve. This is where the greatest pressure will be exerted when the barrel is filled with beer, the liquid pressing outward against the staves, and it is here that the strongest hoops must be placed to hold everything together. You walk to the hoop rack once more, your steps slow and measured, and you stand before the row of iron rings, your eyes moving across the bilge hoops that hang in a neat line, their diameters larger than the chime hoops you have already driven. These bilge hoops are wider and heavier, their iron perhaps 3 fingers across, their surfaces dark with the same forge scale, their inner edges filed to a gripping roughness. You select 2 of them, lifting each in turn to test its weight and to gauge its approximate fit by eye. The iron cool and solid in your hands, the scent of old metal rising faintly from their surfaces. You carry them back to the barrel one at a time, setting them down on the ground beside the base, the iron ringing softly against the packed earth. The first bilge hoop must be positioned near the top of the swelling curve, just below the chime hoop, where the diameter begins to expand. You lift it in both hands, the weight more substantial than the chime hoop, and you raise it over the narrow top of the barrel, lowering it carefully down the taper. The hoop slips over the chime hoop with a soft, metallic clink, and it drops down the staves, sliding freely at first, the taper widening until it comes to a natural stop, partway down the bilge, where the increasing diameter holds it in place. The hoop sits there resting loosely on the sloping oak, its position slightly uneven, one side a fraction higher than the other. You reach out, and you nudge it gently, pressing down on the high side with your palm, the iron shifting with a low, grating sound, the inner edge scraping the wood and leaving a faint, dark trace. You circle the barrel, checking the level from every angle, making the tiny adjustments that have become second nature, until the hoop sits evenly, a dark horizontal band that marks the upper boundary of the bilge. You then fetch the wooden driver and the hammer from the bench, the tools fitting into your hands with the familiarity of old companions, and you take up your position beside the barrel, facing the new hoop. The process begins again, the slow, rhythmic tapping that you know so well by now, the driver placed against the top edge of the hoop, the hammer rising and falling in its short, controlled arc. The first tap produces a sound that is deeper and more resonant than the chime hoop's notes, a low, bell-like tone that seems to travel through the entire barrel, the larger diameter and wider iron creating a different vibration, a richer, fuller voice. The hoop slides downward a tiny fraction, the movement barely visible, and you step to the side, reposition the driver, and tap again, the rhythm re-establishing itself with the same patient, unhurried cadence. The sawdust beneath your boots is already marked with the circular path of your earlier driving, and your feet find the familiar groove naturally, your body settling into the slow, ambling circuit that carries you round the barrel again and again. The driver tapping, the hammer falling, the hoop descending. Driving a hoop onto the bilge feels different from the chime, and your hands learn this difference with each tap, the feedback through the tools telling you a subtle, tactile story. The bilge is the widest part of the barrel, and the hoop must stretch slightly to accommodate the expanding curve, the iron opening up by a tiny, imperceptible amount, its inner circumference growing to match the girth of the oak. This stretching makes the resistance feel slightly softer, more elastic, as if the hoop is breathing with the barrel, expanding and contracting in a slow, metallic rhythm. The sound reflects this change. Where the chime hoop produced a sharp, clean ring as it tightened, the bilge hoop gives a deeper, more sustained note, a sound that hums in the air for a moment before fading, a gentle, resonant thrum that you can feel in your chest as much as hear. The oak itself creaks and settles under the pressure, the staves at the widest point compressing together, their bevels grinding with a soft, sandy sound that is almost continuous, a quiet background whisper that accompanies each tap. You pause occasionally to check the hoop's progress, stepping back and crouching down to sight along its top edge, ensuring that it remains level. The bilge curve is more pronounced here, and the hoop must follow the subtle, changing angle of the staves as it descends, the iron tilting very slightly to match the outward swell, and then the inward taper that begins near the bottom of the bilge. You correct any unevenness with a few extra taps on the high side, the driver nudging the iron into alignment, and then you resume your slow, steady circuit, the rhythm unbroken, the work continuing with the quiet, meditative patience that has characterized the entire day. The sun has shifted further, the light inside the shelter now a warm golden hue that falls in long slanting rectangles across the floor, and the shadows cast by the barrel and the posts have lengthened, stretching toward the east wall of the shelter in dark, distorted shapes. The air is still mild, the earlier warmth of the steam now fully dissipated, and the shelter feels comfortable and calm. A small, peaceful world enclosed by the slate roof and the open sides. When the first bilge hoop has reached its final position, seated just above the widest point of the curve where the staves begin their gentle taper inward toward the bottom chime, you stop your tapping, and you step back, letting the driver and hammer rest at your sides. The hoop sits firmly in place, its iron gripping the oak with a steady, even pressure, its surface marked by the faint, burnished line where the wood has polished the inner edge. You run your hand over the bilge, feeling the smooth, continuous swell, the warmth of the wood now barely perceptible, the surface cool and dry. The barrel has taken on a more finished appearance with this additional hoop, the dark iron bands defining its shape, the pale oak glowing between them in the golden light. The bilge hoop throws a crisp, sharp shadow across the staves, a dark line that follows the curve with geometric precision, and you spend a long moment simply looking at the barrel, your gaze tracing the lines and shadows, the interplay of light and dark that makes the object seem almost sculptural in its quiet dignity. You then lift the second bilge hoop from the ground, this one slightly wider than the first, and you repeat the entire process, raising it over the top, lowering it down the taper, letting it come to rest at its natural stopping point on the swelling bilge, just below the first hoop. The iron settles onto the oak with a soft, ringing clink, and you adjust it, nudging it level, checking the alignment from every side, your movements calm and unhurried, the routine now deeply familiar. The driver and hammer come back into your hands, and you begin the slow circuit once more, tapping the second hoop down the curve, the sound a deep, resonant tone that blends with the creaks and sighs of the settling oak. This hoop travels down past the widest point of the bilge, where the curve reverses and the staves begin to taper inward, and you feel the change in resistance as the direction of the taper shifts, the hoop now tightening as it descends rather than expanding, the iron compressing the wood with a renewed, firm pressure. The process is the same, yet subtly different, the feedback through the tools telling you that the hoop is now moving toward the bottom chime, the barrel's shape narrowing, the final hoops soon to be driven onto the lower taper. You continue the slow, patient driving, the second bilge hoop sinking by tiny increments, the sound of the tapping a steady, rhythmic pulse that fills the shelter and then fades into the quiet of the afternoon. The brewery yard beyond the shelter is alive with the ordinary sounds of the day, the distant rolling of barrels, the voices of the workers, the occasional bray of a horse, but these sounds are muted and far away, a soft, continuous backdrop that does not intrude on the calm focus of your work. You tap and step, the driver doing its gentle work, the hammer a faithful companion, the barrel a silent, patient partner in the slow dance. The second bilge hoop settles into its final position just above the lower quarter, the iron dark and firm against the oak. The space between the two bilge hoops now a band of pale wood that swells outward in a perfect, gentle curve. You stop your circuit and you lower the tools, your breathing slow and deep, your body relaxed despite the sustained effort. And you look at the barrel with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The bilge now fully encircled, the wide middle bound tight, the staves held securely against the pressure that will one day fill them with liquid. The barrel stands in the shelter, a testament to patience and care, and you take a moment to rest beside it, the silence of the afternoon wrapping around you like a soft, warm blanket. The second bilge hoop is seated firmly around the swelling middle of the barrel, its dark iron band matching the first, the two hoops now defining the widest part of the cask with their parallel horizontal lines. The barrel stands with a quiet, settled presence in the shelter, its staves bound tightly by the top chime hoop and the two bilge hoops. The bottom of the assembly still held by the temporary hoop you drove on after the windblast drew the ends together. The next step is to drive the final permanent hoops onto the lower section, the narrowing taper that leads down to the bottom chime, and you turn to the hoop rack to select the rings you will need. The rack still holds several quarter hoops and the bottom chime hoop, their diameters decreasing in size, and you pick them out one by one, lifting each to gauge its weight and fit, the iron cool and dark, their surfaces pitted and rough with the familiar forge scale. You carry them to the barrel and set them on the ground in the order they will be driven. The largest first, the bottom chime hoop last, a small stack of dark rings that glint faintly in the slanting golden light of the afternoon. You remove the temporary hoop from the bottom chime first, since it still occupies the very spot where the permanent hoop must eventually rest. Using the wooden driver and a few gentle taps, you work the temporary ring downward off the taper, the iron sliding with a low, scraping sound, its inner surface marked with a fine brown dust of oak fibers that have abraded during its short service. The temporary hoop comes free and rings softly as you set it aside on the bench, and the bottom ends of the staves, now released from their temporary restraint, hold their shape without springing outward, the curve of the bilge and the grip of the upper hoops keeping everything in place. The bare oak at the bottom chime is pale and clean, the ends of the staves forming a neat, circular rim, the bevels meeting in tight, precise seams that show the care of your earlier work. You take a moment to inspect this lower section, running your hand around the circumference, feeling the slight irregularities where the stave ends are not yet perfectly flush. Small variations that will be corrected when the permanent hoop is driven home and the chime is planed smooth. You lift the first of the quarter hoops, a ring slightly wider than the bottom chime hoop, and you carry it to the top of the barrel, raising it over the narrow opening and letting it drop down the taper. The hoop slides over the chime hoop and the bilge hoops with a series of soft, metallic clicks, each contact a brief ringing note, and it comes to rest on the lower taper, where the staves begin their final narrowing toward the bottom. The hoop sits loosely on the slope, its position uneven, and you reach out to nudge it level, pressing down on the high side with your palm, the iron shifting with a dry, gritty sound, the inner edge scraping the oak and leaving a faint, dark trace. You circle the barrel, checking the alignment from every side, making the small, precise adjustments that have become second nature, until the hoop sits horizontally, a dark, patient ring waiting for the driver and hammer to begin their work. You fetch the tools from the bench, the wooden driver fitting into your left hand with the comfortable, worn familiarity of a tool that has been held for many hours, the hammer settling into your right hand with its balanced, easy weight. You place the rounded head of the driver against the top edge of the quarter hoop, choosing a spot near the front of the barrel, and you raise the hammer in its short, controlled arc, letting it fall with a gentle, measured momentum. The tap produces a sound that is higher and sharper than the bilge hoop's deep resonance, a clean, ringing note that reflects the smaller diameter and the tighter curve. The hoop slides downward a tiny fraction, the movement almost too small to see, and you step to the side, reposition the driver, and tap again, the rhythm re-establishing itself, the slow, steady cadence carrying you around the barrel in a familiar, circular path. The sawdust beneath your boots is deeply tracked now, the groove of your circuit a permanent feature of the shelter floor, and your feet find the familiar depressions without thought, your body moving in its quiet, ambling dance. The quarter hoop descends the taper with a smooth, even motion, the resistance increasing as it approaches the tighter part of the curve, the iron gripping the oak with a firm, steady pressure. The sound of each tap changes gradually, the initial ring becoming a shorter, sharper clink, the hoop tightening, the wood compressing under the iron's unyielding grip. You pause to check the level, crouching down to sight along the top edge, and you find a slight high spot on the far side, a discrepancy of perhaps a 1/16 of an inch. You walk around to that side and give it 2 quick, gentle taps, the hoop settling into alignment with a soft metallic creak, and then you resume your circuit, the driving continuing with the same patient, unbroken flow. The light in the shelter has shifted again, the sun now noticeably lower in the sky, the shadows stretching farther, the golden hue deepening into a warm amber glow that makes the oak look rich and the iron gleam with a soft, burnished luster. The air is cooler now, the warmth of the afternoon beginning its slow decline, and you feel the slight chill on the back of your neck, a pleasant, fresh sensation that keeps you alert and present. When the first quarter hoop reaches its final position, seated firmly on the lower taper just above the bottom chime, you stop your tapping and you step back, letting the tools rest at your sides. The hoop sits tight and level, its dark band a new, permanent addition to the barrel's growing armor, and you run your finger along its lower edge, feeling the slight ridge where the iron bites into the oak. The wood here is cool and smooth, the grain compressed into a dense polished surface, and the joint between the hoop and the stave is so tight that it feels like a single, continuous material rather than two separate substances. You lift the second quarter hoop from the ground, this one slightly smaller, and you repeat the process, raising it over the top, letting it drop down the taper, nudging it level, and then beginning the slow, rhythmic driving. The second quarter hoop sits just above the bottom chime, and as you tap it downward, you feel the resistance increase more rapidly than before, the taper narrowing, the iron stretching to its final, tightest grip. The sound of the tapping is a series of sharp, clear notes, each one a precise, bell-like tone that rings for a fraction of a second and then fades, the notes overlapping into a slow, irregular melody that fills the shelter with its quiet music. After the second quarter hoop is seated, only the bottom chime hoop remains, the final permanent ring that will hold the very ends of the staves in their tight, circular embrace. You lift it from the ground, this smallest and heaviest of the lower hoops, and you carry it to the top of the barrel, letting it slide down the full length of the taper, clicking over each hoop in turn until it comes to rest just above the bottom ends, where the staves are at their narrowest. You nudge it level with your palm, the iron cold against your skin, and you begin the last round of driving, the taps slower and more deliberate than before, each one a careful, measured act that sends the hoop sliding those final fractions of an inch. The sound is a high, tight ring, a note that seems to hang in the air longer than the others, and the barrel responds with a deep, resonant hum that you feel through the soles of your boots, a vibration that travels up from the packed earth and into your bones. The hoop seats itself at the very edge of the bottom chime, its top edge aligned with the ends of the staves, the oak compressed into a final unyielding ring of wood and iron. You step back, lowering the driver and hammer, and you look at the barrel, now fully hooped from top to bottom, its dark iron bands defining its shape, its pale oak glowing in the amber light. The barrel's ends are still open, the top and bottom both simple circles of stave ends without heads, and the next task is to cut the groove into which the heads will be fitted, a groove known as the crows. You walk to the bench where the crowsing tool rests, a specialized instrument that has waited patiently throughout the day, its wooden stock and toothed blade ready for this quiet, final work. The crows consists of a curved wooden guide shaped to ride along the inside of the staves, and a small hooked blade set at right angles, its cutting teeth sharp and precise, designed to plow a narrow channel just inside the chime. The tool has a long handle, polished smooth by many hands, and you lift it from the bench, feeling its weight and balance, the way the handle fits into your palm, the way the blade gleams with a faint oily sheen from the protective coating of tallow that keeps it from rusting. You carry the crows to the barrel, the tool cradled in your arms, and you position yourself at the top opening, looking down into the hollow interior of the cask, the staves curving inward, the seams tight, the scent of oak rising from the dark, enclosed space. You set the curved guide of the crows against the inside of the staves, just below the top chime hoop, and you press it gently into place, the wood of the guide conforming to the barrel's inner curve. The blade is set to cut a groove at a precise depth and distance from the edge, and you adjust the stop with a small brass thumb screw, setting it so the crows will be exactly the right size to receive the wooden head. You then begin to work the tool in a slow circular motion, drawing it around the inside of the barrel, the blade biting into the oak with a soft, crisp sound, a steady rhythmic shushing that is entirely different from the tapping of the hoops. The blade cuts fine, pale curls of oak that spiral up from the groove and fall away, drifting down to the sawdust floor like small delicate ribbons, their color a creamy white against the darker brown of the ground. You turn the barrel gently with your free hand as you work, rotating it in small increments so that the crows can travel the full circumference, the motion a coordinated, patient dance of both hands, the barrel moving, the blade cutting, the shavings falling. The sound is a continuous, gentle rasp, a low, scratchy whisper that fills the shelter with a new, soft texture, and the smell of freshly cut oak intensifies. A clean, sweet, almost floral fragrance that rises from the newly exposed wood, a scent that speaks of the living tree and the open air. You complete one full circuit with the crows, and then you stop to inspect the groove, running your fingertip around the inside of the barrel, feeling the smooth, even channel you have cut, its walls straight, its depth uniform. The groove is perhaps a quarter-inch deep and a quarter-inch wide, a narrow, precise furrow that will hold the head with a snug, watertight fit. You blow gently into the groove, the fine sawdust puffing out in a tiny, pale cloud that swirls in the air and then settles, and you resume the crowsing, making a second pass to deepen the groove slightly, the blade cutting with the same soft, steady rasp, the shavings falling in a continuous, curling stream. The light continues to shift as you work, the amber of the late afternoon deepening toward a softer, more golden tone, the shadows in the shelter stretching long and thin, the barrel's profile casting a dark, distorted shape across the floor. The brewery beyond the shelter has grown quieter, the voices of the workers more sporadic, the carts less frequent, the rhythm of the day winding down toward evening. When you have finished the top crows, you withdraw the tool and you set it down gently on the bench, the blade still sharp, the handle warm from your grip. You then turn your attention to the bottom of the barrel, which is still open. The stave ends a neat, bare circle at the lower chime. You need to repeat the crowsing on this end, and you bend down, taking the crows in your hands once more, positioning the curved guide against the inside of the bottom staves. The angle is different here, the work lower to the ground, and you adjust your stance, bending your knees, settling into a comfortable crouch. The blade bites into the oak with the same soft, crisp sound, the shavings falling now onto the packed earth near your boots, and you turn the barrel with the same slow, coordinated motion, rotating it by small degrees, the crows cutting its precise circular groove. This bottom crows is identical to the top, the depth and distance the same, the careful, patient work repeating itself in a calm, unhurried rhythm, the tool a steady, reliable partner in the slow process of finishing. The shavings accumulate in a small pale pile at the base of the barrel, curling and twisting like thin wooden ribbons, their scent rising fresh and clean, mixing with the cool, metallic smell of the hoops and the ever-present maltiness of the brewery. When the bottom crows is complete, you withdraw the tool and you run your finger around this groove as well, feeling its smooth, even consistency, the precise, careful work that will ensure the heads fit perfectly when the time comes to seat them. You stand up slowly, your knees creaking softly, and you stretch your back, looking at the barrel that is now so close to completion. Its hoops all driven, its crowses cut, only the wooden heads remaining to seal the ends and make the cask whole. The top of the barrel stands open, a perfect circle of pale oak ends inside which the crow's groove runs like a hidden, precise channel, waiting to receive the wooden head that will seal the cask. The late afternoon light has softened to a deep, golden amber. The shadows in the shelter now long and thin, stretching toward the brewery wall in dark, distorted shapes, and the air has taken on the cool, still quality that precedes the evening. You leave the crowsing tool on the bench, its blade wiped clean of shavings, and you turn to the stack of finished barrel heads that lean against the far wall of the shelter, their circular shapes like oversized coins cut from pale, close-grained oak. The heads are made of several boards joined edge to edge with wooden dowels, the outside surfaces planed smooth, the edges bevel to a slight taper that will wedge them firmly into the crows. You select one for the top, lifting it with both hands, feeling its weight and its balance. The wood dry and cool, smelling of the same tannic sweetness as the staves. You carry it back to the barrel, the disc held carefully, its surface reflecting the amber light with a soft, low luster. You stand before the open top, and you sight across the head, comparing its diameter to the opening. A quick visual check that confirms it is the right size, slightly larger than the inner circle of the crows, so that it must be pressed home with gentle, patient force. You then set the head aside on the ground, leaning it against the bilge, and you take a moment to inspect the top crows one final time, running your fingertip around the inside of the groove, feeling for any stray shavings or rough spots that might prevent a smooth fit. The groove is clean and even, its walls straight, its depth consistent, and you brush away a few loose fibers with a soft, careful stroke of your thumb. The barrel is ready, and you lift the head again, orienting it so that the grain of the boards aligns roughly with the grain of the staves, a small, traditional detail that adds to the structural harmony of the cask. You rest the edge of the head on the top of the staves, tilting it at a slight angle, and you begin to work it into the opening with a slow rocking motion, pressing down on one side, then the other. The wood sliding against wood with a soft, grainy sound. The bevel of the head finding the inner edge of the crows. The fit is snug, the head refusing to seat fully with hand pressure alone, and you know that the wooden driver will be needed to coax it the rest of the way. You fetch the driver from the bench, the same beech tool that drove the hoops, its rounded head now worn even smoother from the day's work, and you position yourself beside the barrel, the driver in your left hand, the light hammer in your right. You place the rounded head of the driver gently against the surface of the wooden head, near the edge, not on the very rim but just inside, where the wood can absorb the blow without splintering. The first tap is light, barely more than a nudge, and the head responds with a tiny inward slide, the bevel sinking a fraction deeper into the crows. The sound a soft, hollow thump that resonates through the barrel's interior with a deep, brief echo. You move the driver to the opposite side, tapping with the same gentle force, and then to the sides in between, walking around the barrel in a slow, careful circuit, the head inching downward, the gap between its outer edge and the chime narrowing with each pass. The sound of each tap is muffled and low, a quiet wooden heartbeat that fills the shelter, and the head itself begins to sing with a tight, resonant tone as it seats deeper, the oak vibrating like the skin of a drum. You pause to check the alignment, crouching down to look across the surface of the head, ensuring it is sinking evenly, not tilted, and you see that one quadrant is slightly high, so you give it 2 extra taps, the driver making a quick, precise double thump that brings the head level. You then resume your slow circuit, the head now almost fully seated, the crows gripping its bevel with a firm, unyielding hold. The final few taps are the lightest of all, little more than a gentle pressure, the driver barely lifted, the hammer guiding rather than striking, and the head settles into its final position with a soft, deep thud, the top surface flush with the ends of the staves, the circle complete. You step back and you look at the sealed top, the pale, smooth surface of the head now closing the barrel, the grain of the boards running across the opening in a quiet horizontal pattern that contrasts with the vertical lines of the staves. The chime hoop wraps around the edge, dark iron against pale oak, and the seam between the head and the groove is so tight that no light passes through. You place your palm flat on the head, feeling its cool, even surface, the slight depression of the dowel joints, the way the wood seems to hum with a contained potential energy. The barrel is now half complete, the top sealed, the bottom still open, and you stand for a moment in the quiet of the shelter, the sounds of the brewery yard fading into a distant, gentle murmur as the afternoon draws toward its close. The next step is to fit the bottom head, but the barrel must be turned over carefully so that the open end faces upward. You grasp the bilge with both hands, your fingers wrapping around the curve, the iron hoops cool against your palms, and you rock the barrel gently, testing its weight and its balance. It is heavy now, the staves and hoops combining into a solid, dense mass, and you need to shift it with a slow, controlled motion to avoid jolting the newly seated top head. You tilt the barrel towards you, letting its bottom edge lift from the ground, and you pivot it on the curve of the bilge, rotating it in the quarter turn, the stave scraping the packed sawdust with a low, gritty sound. You then ease it over, lowering the top end to the ground, the barrel now inverted, its open bottom facing upward, the pale circle of stave ends and the dark bottom chime hoop framing the empty interior. The ground beneath the barrel is marked with a circular impression, a shallow, dusty ring that records where the cask has stood throughout the day, and you glance at this mark before focusing on the new top, now the bottom in need of its head. You select the second head from the stack against the wall, this one matched to the first in grain and thickness, and you carry it to the barrel, repeating the process you have just completed. The light has changed again, the amber deepening toward a soft, honeyed gold, the shadows stretching almost to the far wall of the shelter, and the air carries a faint, cool breeze that stirs the sawdust into tiny, swirling eddies near the ground. You tilt the head into the crows at the bottom opening, working it in with the same slow, rocking motion, the bevel seating in the groove with a soft, woody whisper. You then take up the driver and hammer once more, and you begin the gentle, rhythmic tapping, moving around the barrel in your familiar circuit. The sound a quiet, echoing thump that seems to belong to the late hour, a calm, measured punctuation that matches the slowing pace of the day. The bottom head seats with the same snug, precise fit, the driver working at home, the final taps barely audible, the oak accepting its place with a soft, final sigh. When the head is flush, you set the driver and hammer down on the bench, their work for this barrel now complete, and you stand back looking at the fully closed cask, its ends sealed, its hoops all in place, its shape a perfect swelling cylinder of oak and iron. Now comes the last, quiet ritual, checking the hoops one final time. You walk around the barrel in a slow, deliberate circle, your eyes moving over each iron band, from the top chime hoop to the bottom, taking in the bilge hoops at the widest point, the quarter hoops on the tapers. You reach out with a hammer, holding it lightly in your right hand, and you tap each hoop gently, not to drive it further, but to test its tightness through the sound it makes. The chime hoop at the top rings with a high, clear note, a bright, bell-like ping that speaks of firm, even pressure, a hoop fully seated. The first bilge hoop gives a deeper, more resonant tone, a low, humming thrum that fades slowly, its voice steady and true. The second bilge hoop echoes the first, a fraction lower in pitch, and the quarter hoops sing out with sharp, crisp notes that overlap and blend, a small harmonious chord of iron and oak. The bottom chime hoop, the last to be driven, answers your tap with a tight, ringing sound, a clean, final note that confirms its grip. Each tap is its own small, distinct event, a single, brief contact that you perform with a calm, unhurried attention, moving from hoop to hoop, listening, the sounds filling the shelter with a quiet, metallic music that seems to celebrate the completion of the work. Satisfied, you set the hammer down on the bench for the last time, its handle warm from your grip, its head dark and still. You then grasp the barrel by the bilge, your hands finding the familiar curve, and you begin to roll it slowly out of the shelter and across the brewery yard, toward the long row of finished casks that stand against the brick wall of the main building. The cobblestones are uneven under the iron hoops, and the barrel rumbles with a low, continuous sound, a deep, wooden thunder that reverberates through your palms and up into your arms. You guide it carefully, steering it with small adjustments of your hands, the barrel rolling in a straight, steady line, its weight a solid, manageable presence. The yard is quiet now, the workers gone, the cart still, only a single pigeon watching from the ridge of the roof, its head cocked, its feathers ruffling in the cool evening breeze. The sky above is a pale, washed blue, the sun low and golden, casting long shadows that stretch across the cobblestones, and the air smells of damp stone and malt, the faint sweet scent of oak drifting from the barrel as it moves. You reach the row of finished casks, a long, orderly line of barrels that stand against the brick wall, their hoops dark and tight, their staves seasoned to a gentle silvery brown. Each one is a quiet monument to the same patient process, the same slow rhythm of steaming and bending and driving and fitting, and your barrel joins them now, taking its place at the end of the row. You tip it upright with a careful, controlled lift, the base settling onto the cobblestones with a soft, final thud, the barrel standing tall and complete among its companions. You step back, your hands falling to your sides, and you look at the row of casks, their shapes repeating in a quiet, rhythmic pattern, the light and shadow playing across their curves. Then you reach into your pocket and you pull out a simple cloth, a square of old, soft cotton, and you wipe your hands slowly, the cloth passing over your fingers, your palms, the backs of your hands, removing the last traces of sawdust and iron scale. The motion calm and unhurried, a small private ritual that marks the end of the work. The yard settles into the deepening quiet of late afternoon, the sounds fading one by one until only the faint, distant murmur of the city remains, a low, constant hum that seems to come from far away. The shadows lengthen further, the golden light turning to a soft, dusky rose, and the barrel stands still and silent among the others, its iron hoops gleaming faintly, its oak glowing with a warm amber hue. The scent of oak and damp stone lingers in the air, a clean, earthy perfume, and you stand there for a long, slow moment, breathing it in, your body relaxed, your mind quiet. The day has passed in a slow, measured procession of small tasks, each one the step in the quiet, patient story of the cooper's work. And now, with the barrel finished and the yard at peace, there is nothing more to do except to be still, to let the calm of the evening wash over you, and to leave the barrel with its companions, a silent, enduring circle of oak and iron, waiting for the beer that will one day fill it waiting in the gentle fading light of a Victorian evening.